Since joining the border patrol, I've been having nightmares. This seemed like the only place I could talk about it. In the last one, I'm tracking somebody through the desert on a moonless night. My flashlight chases 2 pairs of footprints until I get to a clearing. Then the tracks end in the middle of the dirt. It doesn't make sense, but maybe the wind blew them away, or they were abducted by aliens, or maybe it's an ambush. Unsettled, I start to head back, fast. But then I trip on something in the dark dirt. My head hits the ground, and my flashlight flies into the brush away from me. As I try to get up, there's this resistance on my neck. I strain to lift my head, and the resistance becomes a force, a pull. Finally, I turn to see an ashy hand tugging at my collar, and it wants me to join it in the dirt. That's when I wake up and see it's just Steve pulling at my collar. Steve's my journeyman. We're at a port of entry on the US-Mexico border watching their live feeds all night. I must have fallen asleep. Look alive, Dom. We got bogeys. He points at a drone video feed, and I see a man, a woman, and a child at the fence. The man cuts a hole in it while the woman watches. The kid just sort of stares into the blackness. As I try to figure him out, he turns to the camera. Maybe it's because of the nightmare, but his blank face, quivering with black and white pixels, looks like a nest of worms to me. We hit the road. Tracking the sensor hits to our bogeys. Steve's been pissed at me ever since I put in my transfer to the Asylum office, and the chief gave us midnights as punishment. Finally, he breaks the silence. You know, you'll do a lot more good out here than sitting at a desk, he says. I know, man, I know. So why quit? He asks, and now it's my turn to be mum. I'm not going to tell him about the nightmares and the guilt. When I told you I worked for Border Patrol, you probably imagined I was some racist white guy with a mustache. Actually, I'm Latino, so the guilt is 10 times worse. Is this about the guy we found? He presses. The guy is a migrant who ran out of water and drank his own piss for 5 days until his kidneys gave out. No man, it's not that. I got a girl up in Tucson and I want to be closer to her. I lie. Shoulda known, he smirks. You're a pussy for pussy. He swerves off the road onto the dirt. We're headed straight for the border now when the sensor hit stops moving. I rub my eyes to make sure it really isn't moving. Midnights haven't been kind to me. My nightmares seem to blend into reality. We track it to a spot 2 miles from the border. There's a body there collapsed in the dirt. Steve and I bolt out of the car. Flipping the body, it looks like the guy has been mauled by an animal. Deep gashes run down his face and chest, spilling sticky and glistening black blood onto the ground. A bloody hunting knife rests in the dirt beside him that he probably used to defend himself. Mountain lion, I asked Steve. He shines his light on the man's face, punctured with deep and violent stabs. Something bigger than that, he says. Steve traces a path with his torch up from the body to find 2 pairs of footprints running into the brush. A nauseating deja vu bubbles up inside of me. It looks exactly like my nightmare. Steve tries to radio, but all he gets is static. Let's hang back and call the cavalry, he says. There could be people hurt up there, I shoot back. I don't wait for his response. I have enough corpses on my conscience, so I draw my weapon and head into the brush. Steve follows behind. It's in there where I can't see more than a few feet ahead of me that I feel what it's like to be hunted. Not by an animal, but something worse. Something that puts my hair on edge. It's just karma, I think to myself, and the feeling passes as we emerge. Our flashlights chase up the footprints to converge on 2 figures huddled under a Apollo verd tree. It's a mother clutching her injured kid. I put my gun away, and thankfully they don't run as we approach. The kid looks in bad shape. His shirt is covered in blood, and he has a glassy deadness in his eyes. Does your boy need medical attention? I asked the terrified woman in Spanish. No, he's fine. Just scared, she replies in English. Do you have any weapons on you? Steve barks. No, nothing, she says. Search them, he orders me. I'm going to try and call this in. He steps away while I search and question the mom. Her name is Alma. She's from Nogales and ran away when a gang tried to kill her 11-year-old son, Juan. Examining the boy, I find the telltale bruises of a gang initiation and a tattoo peeking out from his sleeve. I hike it up a little to get a better look. It's a gothic cursive M that ends in a coiled devil's tail. I've seen it many times before. It's the Sign Los Mares, the ultimate bad hombres. They're the guys who tat up their entire bodies with guns and skulls and demons. No wonder the poor kid looks like he's seen the devil. It's because he has. The boy pulls away from me and hugs his mom. We want asylum, she implores me. We can talk about that back at the station. I point to the brush. Can you tell me who the dead man is over there? He was our coyote. What happened to him? Alma clams up. Finally, she says, an animal got him. What kind of animal? Before she can answer, Steve returns with a bewildered look on his face. Dom, come listen to this. He twists the dial on his radio. It sounds like static to me, so I turn it up to the max. Just above the hiss, I can hear a man whispering. His words are lispy and don't sound like anything I've heard before. His breathless delivery sends a chill down my spine. Any idea what language that is? Pima, I offer. We're not far from the Tohono Res. Well, it's the only signal I can get out here. You mean you can't reach the station? Now my chill is cresting into panic. No, Steve says gravely. Maybe someone's jamming us. The cartels have gotten pretty high-tech, and we're sitting ducks out here. We both look at Alma and Juan with renewed suspicion. I bind their wrists with pull-string handcuffs, then we hike back to our car as fast as we can. The wind has picked up into a full howl, half covering the dead coyote in dirt. I help Alma and Juan into the back while Steve starts the car. What about the body? Leave it for tribal police, he says while he struggles with the GPS on the dash. This fucking thing can't find us. Let me see. I fiddle with the settings, but all I get is a blank map and the message, GPS signal not found. The headlights of our vehicle beam pathetically into the darkness, so maybe we see 30 feet of dirt. Without our GPS, we might as well be on the moon. Try restarting the car, I suggest. I'll try my phone. I pull up the Maps app and I get the same message, no signal. I even stick the phone out the window, but still nothing. Nothing on my phone either. What about you? Steve bangs on the dash in frustration. Nothing. Maybe the satellite is down. GPS is the US military. So unless World War III just started, then it's not the fucking satellite. Is everything okay? Alma asks from the back. Everything's okay, I say. Then why aren't we going? We need you to be quiet, ma'am, Steve snaps. What is the problem? Are we in danger? She insists, growing anxious. We have it under control. Now I need you to calm down, Steve orders. As they argue, I try to calm down the situation, but Juan seems completely numb to our conversation. He just stares ahead, past us. Suddenly, his eyes go wide. He points forward and screams. I whip my head to look out the front of our vehicle. What I see is more terrifying than any of my nightmares. I will do my best to describe it. It looks like a large tumbleweed bouncing across our headlights, but it's not a tumbleweed. It's too big, too round, and too black. Even though the light hits it dead on, it's pure black, and its outline isn't a perfect circle either. It quivers like it has hundreds of tiny hairs on it. You know, in high school biology they would show you what a virus looks like close up. That's what it looks like, except big enough to swallow you whole. At least, that's what I think it looks like. I can only see it for a few seconds before it bounces into the darkness. Did you see that? I shout. See what? Steve asks me, scared. Just drive. The car lurches forward. As we barrel away, Alma clutches her son and whimpers a prayer in Spanish. I check behind us, but I can't see anything other than desert. My heartbeat lowers, and I can finally think clearly. Was it all in my head? Then I remember going camping with my mom. She taught me how to navigate with the stars, and seeing the stars is one of the only things I like about this job. So we managed to follow the North Star to the road. Back at the station, I process Alma and Juan and take their fingerprints. The mysterious horror of the desert feels like a distant memory, washed away by the everyday horror of our bureaucracy, but I've been numb to that for a long time now. I bring Alma and Juan into Steve's office. They sit across from him, and I close the door. He takes a freshly printed document from his laser jet and starts a pitch I've heard 100 times before. I'm not sure what you've heard about our procedure, but I want to be 100% honest with you because the next decisions you make will have a big impact on you and your family. Now, are you comfortable with English, or do you want Agent Lopez to translate? English, Alma says, and I'm relieved. I hate this next part. Excellent. This is a temporary detention facility. In a few days, you'll be transferred to another larger facility to await trial. Your son will not be transferred with you because we are not allowed to hold him in detention. I will allow it, she interrupts. Please let me finish everything I have to say, Steve says sharply. I will get to your choices at the end. Do you understand? Yes. As I was saying, your son will not be transferred with you. You have committed a crime against the United States, and we prosecute every case without exception. The penalties are severe if you are found guilty. You can get up to 6 months jail time, after which you and your son will be deported and barred from legally re-entering the United States. But we want to apply for asylum. Yes, you can apply, but the odds of getting it are very low. Do you remember how many people get asylum from Mexico, Agent Lopez? Between 2 and 3%. Tears start to well up in her eyes. Steve's an excellent agent, and he knows how to use my good cop vibe to break people. Now, he goes in for the kill. But there is a way to avoid all this, he says as he pushes forward a document with all the grace of a Vegas magician. It basically says you volunteer to leave the United States. You sign this, and we take you to a hotel tonight and put you on a plane tomorrow. You won't have anything on your record, and you can still apply for asylum legally at a port of entry. We tried in Nogales, but they sent us back. We're working through the backlog as fast as we can. It won't be any better here. She pushes the contract back. We can't go back. They will kill my son. Steve maintains his smile, but now it has a sardonic hint. You are very tired. Take a night to sleep on it and you can tell me your final decision in the morning. He nods to me. Agent Lopez will take you to your cell. I escort them down a hallway filled with cells. They are all packed with migrants, but the last one only houses one other middle-aged woman, Maria. Even though it's 2 a.m., she's still up. We found her in the desert a few days ago, trying to bury her husband's body. They came all the way from Guatemala and they couldn't keep up with their coyote, so he cut them loose. Her husband gave her the last of their water, but then she couldn't bear to leave him when he died. Now, she sits on the bench and prays quietly on her rosary. I was raised Catholic. The desert convinced me there's no God out there, but I'm not so sure about the devil. I hand Alma a pair of mylar blankets for their bedding and open the cell. Juan refuses to go in. He doesn't say anything and just plants himself firmly in the concrete floor. Alma argues with him, then pulls him, then pushes him with all her might, but he doesn't budge. He just stares at Maria as she utters, El Señor es mi pastor, nada me faltará, en lugares de verdes pastos me hace descansar. And that's when Juan starts to hiss. Maria stops her prayer and turns around, white in the face. Her sudden silence soothes him, but Alma isn't relieved. Fear creeps into her eyes as she escorts him inside. I help Alma make a bed for Juan, then I close the cell. On the other side of the bars, she talks to me in Spanish. Do you like what you do? Her question gets me off guard, so I answer honestly, no. Then why do you do it? Because my mom's sick. She has cancer, and this is the best job for miles. Do you think I'm a monster? I blurt out. It doesn't matter, she says. I commit a crime because my son will die, and you commit a crime because your mother will die. There is no real choice when your family is in danger. I turn to leave, unable to bear any more shame in front of her. But she calls to me again. But I have a choice. Should I take the deal? I froze. This isn't in Steve's script. I already feel so much guilt for my decisions that the weight of others will crush me. Forget it. Her eyes sink to the ground, and she turns to rejoin her son. I watch her crawl into her mylar blanket and close her eyes as Maria starts to pray again. Juan lies on the ground but doesn't sleep. He just glares at Maria with a snake-like hatred in his eyes, and part of me wonders if he'll hiss again. Or do something worse. I get home around 4 a.m., pop some Ambien, and get into bed. It's hard to fall asleep. There's another dead body seared into my memory, this one disemboweled by a black sphere of death. But then I feel a delicious buzz flood my brain. My mind finally stops racing. I can close my eyes. And that's when I hear it. A hiss. It's coming from under the bed. At first, I don't think it's real. I'm dreaming. And like a dream, I'm not in control of my own body. I hang my head over the bed to look underneath. Down there, something slithers in the darkness. Hissing again. It sounds just like one. So now I know I must be dreaming. The black quivering mass moves toward me, and suddenly I'm face to face with a snake. It bares its fangs, and it takes every survival instinct in my brain stem to pull me away from its bite. I watch the snake slither out from under my bed. It silently moves across the room and through the open screen door to the outside. Here's the part that terrifies me. I can't tell the difference between my nightmares and my life anymore. I work at Area 51. Now I know what you're thinking when you read that title. You roll your eyes and glance upwards or downwards for a better story with a more plausible setup. That's what should happen. That is the point. What is written here, I don't want this found by my higher-ups. I can't explicitly say what my job is for those reasons, but I'll say that I have a mid-level amount of access. I will say that I'm old enough to have been born before Reddit, and old enough to not know how to use Reddit. Hopefully you're all kind enough to help me use it. Anyway, some backstory. I grew up in southern Nevada. I can't say what town, though it's one of those blink and you'll miss it small towns. The only plus side is it's near Area 51. I grew up in a military family. They were always moving around and I just happened to pop out of my mom in Nevada. My dad was a pilot, so they transferred him to Area 51. He'd take his little white truck and drive away at 10 p.m. And he'd always get home around 4 in the morning the next day. I'd always ask him about his work, but he'd stay quiet about it. Mom always told me not to talk to him about it, and that left me bummed out. It also made me more determined to get a job there. I was slightly disappointed when I first started out. Contrary to popular belief, we do fly a lot of low-tech stuff here. It is a military installation, what do you expect? Aliens aren't just walking having coffee with my coworkers, and sadly, I haven't seen any in my whole time working on the base. I will say, however, there has been some weird stuff happening as of late, so I want to get this out in case something were to happen. And 2, I can't really talk about it to other people, which is why I appreciate the anonymity of Reddit. I started working there as my dad retired and became a part of the Roadrunners Club. They put me through so many tests and polygraphs. There is so much security there. You aren't even allowed to sign your real name for anything. Checks come to you from proxy companies, which I won't name. Okay, onto the stories. Recently there was an event in California where a lot of people saw something they shouldn't have. I remember sitting at home on Twitter and seeing it all blow up. I soon got a call on my secure cell phone provided by Area 51 from one of my bosses, and they told me to drive to California. A very boring 8-hour drive later, I arrive at the military base and greet my boss. I'm not the best author, as in just telling things as they happened. I'll try to paint a good enough picture, though. It was noonish. The object was under a tarp. I was told it landed a bit north of the sighting. Landed, I asked, who was driving it? It was just a test pilot. He didn't even look at me. He was just fixated on the object obscured by the tarp. Testing for what? I asked. What kind of aircraft was he testing? You're really asking too many questions. He told me. He finally looked at me, but his eyes had a dazed look. His eyes looked glazed a bit. Well, you did call me here, I responded. I did, he asked, looking confused. Yeah, I said matter of fact. He looked at me for a long time. I'm giving you access. I was stunned. A promotion of all things. I had been working there for so long without even a praise, and I suddenly got a promotion. My boss, I'll call him Bob, he told me to make sure the aircraft gets transported safely back to the base. I agreed happily, still riding the high of my sudden promotion. Now, looking back on it, I could swear the craft was glowing, but it must have been the early afternoon sun bouncing off of it. So, I can confirm to you, which obviously they will deny, that no, it's not a missile. It was a manned aircraft. A shorter flight back to the base had us arrive by nightfall. It was getting pitch dark earlier. Area 51 has a peculiar way for planes to land. They turn on the lights for a very brief moment, and suddenly we land. I never question it though. We really aren't allowed to. So, the craft is out, and looking at it again, I really swear I saw it glowing. I don't know how to describe it. Maybe think of the blue of a flame. It looked like a blue flame was encasing it. My view was cut off when a worker hastily covered it up with the corner of the tarp. They transported it into one of the hangars they kept the old blackbirds in. The hangar doors shut and I was left outside with 2 CIA agents dressed in their matching black suits, along with my boss. "What do I do now?" I ask. "You report to Cecil tomorrow," he said. I don't know if it was a trick of the light, but both the CIA agents seemed to be mouthing something as my boss was talking. Now, I'm standing there, kinda creeped out about the whole thing. I was feeling oddly uncomfortable, to be completely honest. They let me sleep on the base. I'm typing this on my phone and I'm using the free internet. I'll update you all on what happens tomorrow if you want to hear more. I think I'm going to get to see the craft. Oh wait, I just got an email from my boss. Okay, the subject is blank and the page is blank. Okay, I also suddenly feel like I'm being watched. It's a small room, so that doesn't help my claustrophobia. I think I should sleep. I'll answer any questions when I can, after I meet with my boss tomorrow, and post an update if I'm alive. Haha, kidding. Sorry for the long, mostly uneventful post. I just feel like something bad is about to happen. Do you ever get that impending doom feeling? I'm going to start out with that I am shocked to see the popularity my post got. If I wasn't on their radar before, I am now. Thanks Reddit. Moving on. No, I'm not dead. It's been a busy past couple of days. We got a signal from space. Amazing. The higher-ups were hush-hush about it. I got it across my desk and was surprised when I saw I couldn't read the contents. They were confidential, sealed up with a lock if you could believe it. How I knew it was about the signal was because they told me it was, and that I was to deliver it to Cecil as soon as possible. I playfully asked if the signal was connected to the crash, and they gave me the dirtiest look I have ever received. I was asked on the other post about the Art Bell call. I knew the guy who called. Now I can tell you for a fact it wasn't a hoax. I was there when we shut him down. Now, the stuff he said, I can't tell you if he was telling the truth or not. I honestly don't know. The officials cut him off and got him because he might divulge things about Area 51, like weapons testing and whatnot. That was their excuse anyway, nothing about aliens. Though we have had a lot of switches in power since that day, along with what I told you about Bob being taken away for something by those nice CIA agents. Someone called to say it was a hoax later just to make sure people didn't believe the crazy things he said. I didn't believe anything he said, but now I'm having second thoughts. People have been asking me in detail about the work here. As much as I want to tell you, there isn't much I can tell you without triggering the filter that searches the wireless network. Yes, Area 51 has Wi-Fi. Once you get past the snipers and the landmines and the trap holes, it's pretty relaxed around here. It was a mess when Pokemon Go released. You wouldn't believe all the stuff on base. Anyway, a lot of people got in trouble for playing. I don't have any interesting stories to tell you besides the missile, so I asked around. I checked in the mess hall. Frank has been down to ground 2 under the west hangar. At first I thought he was bullshitting me, as you would think if someone told you there were anti-gravity machines and literal working laser weapons with short cartoony beams and everything. He told me when he asked where they got this stuff, they said they made it. I asked him who they were. He told me the short gray-skinned men that worked there. Aliens? I asked jokingly. Yes, he said seriously. Seriously, Frank, I said, prodding him. He looked like he wanted to continue, but the CIA men were over my shoulder by the food bin. They looked different today, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. We went back to eating. I asked my new friend Steve about the Men in Black and what he thought of them. Love that movie, he said. No, the CIA Men in Black over there. I nodded in their direction. Oh, he said through a mouthful of sandwich. Those aren't CIA, are you stupid? CIA don't look like. And then he stopped mid-bite. His eyes glazed over. Yeah, no, those are CIA. He went back to quietly eating his sandwich, ignoring me and staying silent for the rest of the time. I got curious and went home for the day, taking the shuttle into Vegas and then back to my house. I Google searched Men in Black occurrences. Now here I am, surfing Reddit, going through Men in Black conspiracies. It's been 6 hours since I've typed the above paragraph. They are onto me. I am going radio dark permanently after this, but I want to tell you all what happened before I leave so that my record is out there. If this is posted without a proper ending, know that they got me and I had to press send as quickly as I could before destroying the phone. They followed me back to my house. Those things, the CIA agents. I don't have curtains, so when I look up, partially blinded by the light screen of my phone, I swear I see the outline of something outside. It's late, and I knew I saw a darker shade of black that quickly darted out of the way. It made my skin crawl. I quickly went around to make sure everything was locked up tight. I got to the back door, the knob rattled for like 5 seconds before stopping. I heard them outside. They weren't talking English. I pressed my ear to the door to see if I could hear them better. Bang. Something hit the door which made me fall backwards. I scrambled to grab my car keys and a kitchen knife. I then switched off all the lights. I had a plan. I unlocked the front door and ran into my bedroom, which is closest to the front door, and hid in the closet. They took the bait and opened the back door slowly. I didn't hear anyone enter, but in the darkness outside my bedroom I heard rustling, some clanging, and the opening of drawers and doors. My bedroom door opened. I got ready. I heard the gibberish. Oh God, that gibberish will be ingrained in my head forever. The closet door began to open. I came out screaming and slicing like a madman on bath salts. I think I hit it because I knocked something out of the way and it screamed, if I could call it a scream, as I blindly ran to my car and started it up. It started fine. Fuck horror movie cliche scenes. I looked out the back of the car and there they were, standing there in my way. One suit was cut a bit. A bit of dark liquid soaked the cut. I hit the gas and ran right into them. Not a sound was made. No thump, no squeal, nothing. I was on the road, safe for now. I'm never going back to Nevada again. I'm sitting at a roadside gas station getting gas now. Sitting in my car. The clerk was nice. Saw I was having a rough night and gave me a free Kit Kat bar, my favorite candy ever. So here I am, on the run from freaking weirdos and eating a Kit Kat bar, typing this story to you all half expecting you'll believe a word of it. These guys, they're really out there. These men in black, CIA imposters. I wonder if they did with Bob what they're going to do with me if they catch me. If they catch me. I guess I was right about the impending doom feeling. I laughed. Oops, the gas is done. Be right back. Okay, back in the... They are here. Hello. I am the poster of the fictional story of I work at Area 51. Everything you have read is false. I am just a young adult male online looking for attention. I am sorry I have lied to you. The fact of the matter is that most stories about UFOs in Area 51 are constantly fabricated in hopes of garnering false hope of extraterrestrial life existing on this planet. What we should be focused on is world peace under one government system, working together as one planet, and ensuring the survival of our race for future discovery. That was just a missile test back a year ago and did not have anything to do with a cover-up. I would not even know because I am not a government official. I apologize for any emotional pain I might have caused and will be reflecting on all of my stupid life choices that has brought me here. We are all in this together, so I invite you all to go to crowded areas with each other to reflect on yourselves. Please make constant eye contact with those around you to know that yes, you all share a true bond and we can all move on from all of this conspiracy nonsense. You won't hear from me ever again. Edit. You are definitely hearing from me again, right now. I'm typing as fast as I possibly can. They are going to kill me for this. I promise you. All I know is I was getting gas yesterday, and I woke up today inside what seemed to be a containment unit. I really don't know how else to describe it. A room with 4 walls and no door, only a mirror. I am not dumb. It was a one-way window. The room was bright when I opened my eyes, and they still hurt moments after. It was just a white room. I was strapped to an oddly comfortable bed. It wasn't laid horizontal, it was at an angle, so I was almost choking on the harness that kept my head in place. For a couple of hours, nothing was said to me. I was to lay there and drown in my own silence. All this over a fucking downed UFO. A fucking Reddit post of all things. Even though it was hidden amongst fiction, it was found. I would say that there was an alien invasion about to happen, but I have no proof, no evidence. Apparently the last time I posted was almost a year ago. My last post was sent right before I was apparently knocked unconscious. But that's impossible. That was yesterday for me. How could I have lost so much time? I didn't even have time to warn anyone. I failed you all. I couldn't even get any details about what they were planning. They are probably amongst you by now. Hidden. How do I know? One of them walked into the containment cell I was being held captive in. Well, walked isn't really the correct term for it, really. He floated inside the room. There were no doors. I checked. How did he do that? The mirror morphed around him. He just floated in and landed in front of me. His limbs. His limbs were like deformed tree branches, twisting and cracking at different tonal pitches that scratched at the inside of my mind. I felt like I was going crazy. Maybe I was. It was a wonder how he even stood with those fragile-looking legs. He looked me over with his surprisingly small glazed-over eyes. Obviously I was shitting myself, no control of my bladder either. I was petrified. And he just fucking stood there for what seemed to be an eternity without saying anything before shifting into a human. An honest-to-God human. He didn't have to say anything either, even in human form. He just stared at me with a side smirk that made me want to punch him. But I couldn't, because he had become my mother. What he was doing was telling me I have failed. Their kind has infiltrated our world. Have you ever forgotten the color of someone's eyes? Someone you were close to. If you suddenly forget the color of a loved one's eyes, it means they have gotten in. Don't look at their eyes. They'll take your past away. Leave you thinking last year was yesterday. He turned his head, still disguised as my mother. Her eyes were like a hard gray if I had to name a color close to it. A violent gray. I can't even begin to describe the otherworldly color that filled the whole of my fake mother's eyes. He pointed to a screen that appeared on the wall. Small videos played in little columns across the wide screen. They were all me. They had timestamps at the top corners. They switched through days and I slowly began to realize how he took my time away from me. He looked to an empty table. There was suddenly a computer on it. He wanted me to finish my story, but his way. Apparently all those other times I didn't do it, I was mind wiped and kept another day. So finally, today I said okay. I was already logged in, and what you see before the edit is the highly monitored post I made. The second I post this, I'll be taken back. They'll come and get me. There's probably one under my bed right now. I can't tell what are just shadows of outside trees and what are their limbs. He then touched my shoulder and I fell asleep. I woke up in my bed an hour later, apparently, and here I am, about to write my life away again willingly. But in any case, today I chose disclosure. Today I chose to lose my life. Thank you all for reading. I'm sorry I failed you. Be safe and don't forget the color of our eyes. I won't have very much time after posting this, and I don't care. Even if they do decide to suicide me, death would actually be better than being bounced around from prison to prison as an off-the-books prisoner. Or worse, be housed in one of those off-record, offshore facilities where I'm sure to die of old age. I'm not one for overly dramatic exposition, so let's get on with it. I've worked with the company for the past 30 years, since the end of Desert Storm where I was admitted as an intern out of MIT. I worked under a company subcontracted by the NSA during the second year of my undergraduate degree, and continued with them after the internship as a freelance technician, up until I achieved my master's and later my PhD in programming. In short, they've basically been with me every step of my adult life and education. I feel uncomfortable describing myself as being gifted. I like to describe myself as having a certain affinity for mathematics, reasoning, and problem solving, which earned me a top position as a computer analyst for the CIA at the age of 35. Despite being relatively young, I understood how serious and important my job was. I had 3 identification badges, the codes for which changed twice daily on the entrance and exit of the facility I worked at in the Northeast. I was also required to sign several memorandums of understanding, privacy contracts, and other documents which would make me an automatic enemy of the state if I so much as violated any of them. My personal computer and laptop at home were also subject to random examination without warrant. In essence, short of the routine colonoscopy, the CIA kept a close tab on almost every aspect of my life, from tracing the cell phone calls of suspected terror cells on American soil, to which was the latest porn video I watched. At last I digress. I had done my job very well for almost 3 decades and was rewarded handsomely for it. The work wasn't necessarily difficult, but it did demand a lot of my time and attention as I was basically on call 24 hours a day. before I attached to the CIA Department of Domestic Threats, which means that I, along with others, were responsible for monitoring the ICT trails of individuals and groups being monitored by the government for various reasons. In essence, it involves taking a peek into the social media accounts of the hundreds of millions of people that are logged on at any given time. Yes, the conspiracies do have some truth to them. Take notice before you too are zuxed. The strange stuff happened almost a year ago. I was assigned to look into the digital trail of a group of individuals who we suspected belonged to an anonymous-esque whistleblower group, intent on revealing top-secret government information. In the past, we had had threats from whistleblower organizations to release information or intelligence, but none came as close as this particular threat. The group, which we tracked down to a brownstone apartment in Manhattan, had successfully made it past the various levels of security and were on the verge of accessing the database when we were able to shut it down. 3 of the 5 members were detained to my knowing. What happened to them after that, I never found out. After all, I'm just a computer guy. One of the curious things about this particular incident was where the group wanted to access the information. It wasn't at the CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, which is often the target of repeated hacking attempts. Instead, the IP address for the target seemed to be traced to an off-the-books facility somewhere in the Southwest. I didn't have the time or luxury to think about it at the time, but after a few weeks, when I had a very rare moment, with no assignments to supervise or paperwork to file, I decided to do some digging of my own to find out more about it. I wasn't particularly interested. Maybe the group were looking for something in particular, but it was strange they would take such a risk to go after something that could have been more easily accessed at the company's Virginia office. What piqued my interest even more was the existence of this off-the-books facility. I watched the movies about secret government buildings and even heard rumors from some of my co-workers about such places, but I always dismissed it as gossip. I did the necessary concealments to avoid being traced by the office security measures. Despite being stringent and almost all-seeing, it had flaws just like any other security system. Small flaws, but if you knew where and when to look, you could turn the book wide open on files, records, field reports, anything you could dream of. Before long, I saw the facility was located in Elgin, Texas, quite literally in the middle of nowhere and no clearly discernible roads or highways near it, at least based on the satellite photos I saw. Satellites, wow. I only had a window of 5 minutes, but based on what I gathered, it appeared to be only one building, just about the regular dimensions of your typical office building. Hell, if I didn't know any better, I would thought the CIA servers made a mistake and were showing me the top of a poultry feed manufacturer or a tractor repair shop. But no, this was the real deal. Not as exciting as Area 51, but what I saw implied that it was one of several links in the information vessels of the CIA. An internal circuit designed to withstand digital attacks from enemies, with Langley being a red herring. I quickly closed the tabs and windows that got me to that area of the CIA database and restarted my computer. I did it just in time because no more than 2 minutes later, 2 of the floor supervisors, let's call them Mr. Black and Mr. White, were seen prowling about the cubicles on my end of the floor for no good reason. I don't consider myself a very paranoid person. Despite being exposed to the clandestine, cloak and dagger things the CIA does on an almost hourly basis, I also don't consider myself to be a conspiracy theorist, but I knew they were down here looking to get an idea of who accessed that part of our department's files. Going from cubicle to cubicle looking over the shoulders of the staff to see what was on their screens, I knew they were looking for me, but I was just fast enough. I also knew that just because I wasn't found this time meant that I had the green light to be careless. Over the next few months, I began using an internet cafe, one city over, to access information. Despite my loyalty to the agency and the fear of what would happen to me if caught, human curiosity won out and got the better of me. Using some technology I bartered from an old friend from MIT, I was able to access data from the Texas facility for 30 minutes once a week. I was able to see a lot of information, everything from the US black bag operations in various parts of the globe to secrets on global leaders as well as local politicians who are being monitored for treason and even blackmailed for child pornography. I learned the CIA had a surprisingly close affiliation not only with other international intelligence agencies, but also with several organizations. Well, agencies you just wouldn't normally expect. Namely the Vatican. There was a lot of files and information being shared in relation to certain priests who were working with the CIA and regime destabilization efforts in certain regions, mainly Eastern Europe, the Middle East, East Africa, and Latin America. But the sharing of information didn't end there. The CIA was also very much interested in recording and transcribing the works of certain priests who served as exorcists and their findings in certain cases of supposed possession. Was the CIA interested in fighting monsters? I don't know. Based on the large compilation of data I saw, it definitely seemed like they were interested in something. Along with the role of various social media operators in assisting the agency with data and information, I also learned about the deaths and assassinations of certain high-profile people. Oh, by the way, Jerry Epstein is in fact dead. His death was planned by the CIA well over a year ago. So despite the memes, he really is gone. Over the next few months, my prowling on the Texas facility gradually got less and less. I considered myself an expert on the actual goings on the global geopolitical scene and would only watch the news to get a hearty good laugh on how poorly informed the anchors and experts were on panel discussions. That was up until a few weeks ago when I saw something that piqued my interest yet again. On the web layout of the Texas facility, I saw an icon I hadn't noticed before at the very bottom of the screen. It was in light brown, almost beige text that matched with the background. If you weren't scanning every inch of the screen, you would have missed it. The text of the icon read, "Terra View." I right-clicked on it, turned on my invisible cloak, and went off. The icon bounced me off of several servers throughout the world as expected, and had several pop-ups describing the consequences of unauthorized viewing. I had no idea what it was. At first I thought it would have been a tracking monitor of various secret installations like the Texas facility, but I was wrong. Dead wrong. At first it seemed like a normal Google Earth search, nothing special or outstanding about it. I was able to see the roof of the Texas facility again, along with various other places. Nothing particularly spooky or weird jumped out at me. That was before I began noticing the numbers and data that appeared at the sides and corners of the screen. If you are not familiar with how Google Earth works, in essence you get rudimentary information on the location, coordinates, distances, and areas along with other data on various regions you're looking at. It was in essence the same with this particular software, but the numbers seemed wrong. It placed the area of certain places much smaller than they ought to have been. I looked at various areas like Pasadena, Florida, and Mississippi. All of them had grossly incorrect data. How is it possible that all of these places were so incorrectly labeled and calculated? Was it a problem with the algorithm, or was it just an elaborate prank at my expense? I wasn't convinced of either of these, so I decided to zoom out of the US and do some calculations of my own. When I caught something at the corner of the screen that looked strange, there appeared to be ice caps to the west where there shouldn't be, and that's when things got weird. I tried rotating the image on the screen using the cursor, and it didn't turn. This wasn't a map, this was the globe, but that was impossible. I tried scrolling back and forward to make sense of what I was seeing, but nothing seemed to make any sense. I was confused and a little nervous at this point. By now 20 minutes had already passed and I had 10 more left before the cloaking signal would begin to get unreliable. I zoomed back out again thinking it was an algorithm, as I was once again bounced around as the screen buffered. What came back on did not relieve me, it shook me. What I saw was the place we've been living our entire lives. I saw the Earth, the real Earth. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of globe-like spheres attached by what I could only describe as tethers to a massive central sphere. As far as the eye could see, I saw no stars, no sun, no moon, or any celestial objects. I felt my eyes water and my mouth open. "Get a fucking room, pal," the man next to me said disgustingly as he got up from his cubicle in the internet cafe. In hindsight, he probably saw my expression and thought I was looking at porn. I couldn't begin to form rational thoughts in my mind, much less words to respond to him. What was I seeing? Is this real? Was this really where we lived? Our Earth or sphere was located somewhere to the northeast of the mother globe. Well, what I call it. What were these other spheres? What lived there? How could this have been kept a secret? I began to think of the ramifications of such a conspiracy, and reasoned quite simply that in order for it to be held over the course of centuries, quite literally everybody would have had to have been in on it. My stomach turned as I thought of our minuteness in this ocean of life. The earth was indeed spherical, but in what way? It was gargantuan, and we and everything we knew and would ever know occupied less than 1/16th of the total area. I was about to close off the window and the device when it happened. The view of the globe shifted from our sphere and rapidly zoomed into another, not too distant globe. I tried to zoom back out, but I couldn't. The signal was being accessed from another point and my commands weren't being responded to. At first I thought I had been made and the CIA was trying to locate me, so I hurriedly turned off the device. Just before the screen cut to Windows blue, I saw them. The things looked like nothing I could describe, and that's when I knew I was accessing a camera feed from another one. Another globe. When I was in college, I made up credits by doing an elective on plant biology. In one of my textbooks, I saw bright yellow fungus. I think they're called lichen. That's the closest I can describe them as. Sentient fungus that moved and shook and vibrated the way no living thing should look like. They emitted colors I can now only see in my dreams, and the after image of these colors has a shadow of something that makes me shake, and my eyes water just to think of it. I got up from that cubicle and ran just before the device shut off. I ran back to my apartment, packed my things and left. I'm in the South now, with nothing but the clothes I have in a knapsack and a list of regrets. They'll be coming for me soon. I'll be labeled as homeless, or deranged struggling with depression, or they'll make me disappear. Either way, I know too much and regret knowing too much. All the mathematics and logic in the world can't help me now. I was such a fool to think we could handle what was out there. In my final hours, I can only think and reflect on the human mind. How beautifully simple. How I miss being ignorant. So, by this point, everyone is no doubt well aware of the Area 51 memes and all the hubbub surrounding them. Apparently, over 1 million people are set to storm the perimeter on September 20th of this year. Should be interesting, but let's be honest for a second, I doubt it will happen. And even if it did, even if by some ridiculous miracle they managed to overwhelm the most powerful military on Earth and infiltrate a top secret base, I don't think they would be exactly thrilled with the results. I will just come right out and say it, I guess. Area 51 is a red herring. It's a distraction and it pretty much always has been. Nothing out there but sand, reclusive scientists, and some crusty ass lake at this point. I mean, think about it, if Area 51 is one of the most top secret and covert black sites in the world, then why does everyone know about it? How secret can a secret be if everyone knows the secret? For God's sake, even Obama acknowledged its existence a while back. That's the whole point of it, they want you distracted so you don't look for the others. But why take my word for it? Who am I anyways? Just some pleb on the internet that decided to cash in on a trend for some clout and perhaps a bit of that sweet, sweet karma. Right? Well, yes, but actually no. That may be who I am now, but I was once a person of particular interest to the United States government. Most people knew me as Mr. Blue. Not my real name, but it is easier to pronounce. I used to be a pilot, did that for many years and loved every second of it. I tell you, there's nothing quite like soaring through the skies and breaking the sound barrier for the first time. You might crap your pants a little, but it's all just part of the experience really. Now, unfortunately, the type of work I did was above top secret, and for all of our safeties, I cannot go into any further detail on what I actually did or who I actually worked for. One day, I was out on a classified reconnaissance mission in a certain area where I should not have been. I'll apologize here for the vague details of certain things, but you gotta understand, the things I'm about to tell you are beyond top secret. They would kill me 10 times over for uttering a word of it, so here's to hoping that doesn't happen. Anyways, the mission was going as planned, when suddenly my instruments started going crazy on my dash. Air pressure inside the cabin just plummeted and the speed and fuel consumption gauges looked like they were playing ping pong with each other. Everything began to rattle like crazy and my alarms erupted into a symphony of irritation. Next thing I know, I see this bright light soar past me at an ungodly speed. The shockwave it produced was so violent that it shredded the hull of my craft. In a split second, I went from casually flying along to suddenly regaining consciousness as I plummeted headfirst towards the ground at terminal velocity. I managed to pull my chute before I splattered, but as I touched down, I almost wished I hadn't. There I was met by an awaiting entourage of at least 24 men in winter camo suits and masks. They all pointed their weapons at me and screamed in a language which I recognized as English. I tried my best to calm them down and appear unthreatening, but that didn't stop them from wrenching me into a pair of handcuffs and hauling me into one of their cars. They began to drive away, and the real severity of the situation hit me. I was not going to be saved. The people I worked for had never said it, but it was always well known that if ever you were captured, then you were pretty much on your own. With that in mind, I had no real incentive to keep my mouth shut once they started interrogating me. It may seem cowardly, but I was not about to be brutally tortured for a former ally which would never come to bail me out. Yeah, the government says they don't torture people, but trust me, when they really want to know something, there's no tactic too extreme. And they really wanted to know something. So I told them about who I worked for, what my mission was, where I grew up, all that jazz. It was all fabricated, but they took the bait regardless thanks to their severe trust issue of the Russians at the time. They were actually pretty cool after that. I mean, they wouldn't let me leave their custody, but that was better than being dead. Or at least it was at first. They transported me away from my initial interrogation place into a secure facility somewhere nearby. I was blindfolded the whole time, but from the rumbling of multiple vehicles, sounds of doors sliding open multiple times, and the distinct feeling of my stomach dropping, I could tell they had taken me somewhere deep underground. Soon after that, I stepped off the elevator, and they removed my blindfold. Their leader was a guy with a stern face, thick gray beard, and eyes that looked etched from concrete. He wore a black suit with some symbol upon his heart pocket that I didn't recognize. He stepped in front of everyone and outstretched his arms while staring me in the eye. "Welcome to your new home." An ever so slight grin slithered onto his face as he said it. I glanced down the dismal gray hallways, which seemed to stretch out further than I could see in multiple directions. They lead me down the hall on the right, past dozens of locked corridors and rooms before ushering me into a cell. My handcuffs were removed soon after, and the door slid shut behind me. The same man that had welcomed me to the facility then approached the window and pushed the intercom button. "We appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Blue. I don't believe there is any reason why our time spent together has to be unfriendly. I apologize for all of this, but you must realize that this is a necessary precaution we must take. I hope you understand." I took a moment, then nodded back to him. "Wonderful, we will have dinner sent to you soon. If you require anything, then please notify one of the guards outside of your quarters." And with that, he and his little entourage turned and strolled down the hallway. That was my very first night in the facility I eventually came to know as FEZ. I don't think it's the official name, but I heard several personnel at the base refer to it by that acronym over the years. I still don't know exactly what it stands for. Forbidden Enclosed Cigarette, Forsaken Evil Zoo, Forced Ejaculation Zeal, Fabulous Elf Zombies. The best I could really come up with was Fortified Experimental Zone. It makes the most sense too, all things considered. At first it wasn't actually too bad. The staff was nice, they cooked great food, and there was plenty to see around the base. Although every once in a while, I would hear the screams just barely echoing through the vents. They interviewed me probably 100 more times after that, and were especially interested in the craft which I was piloting. The craft in question was one of our own top secret technologies, but unfortunately it had been blown up by whatever that light was, so I couldn't tell them much about it. It took years of incarceration there, but eventually the staff came to trust me almost as much as they did their own comrades. We would laugh and joke with one another, and soon enough we became what some might even consider to be friends. I became especially close with one of the scientists named Kevin. Kevin was a smart guy, comical too, and explained quite a lot of things to me. He and I would spend hours talking on countless occasions. He was my only real glimpse into what was happening in the outside world. He'd bring in books and films for us to enjoy together. He kept me updated on everything, and over the next 30 years, we developed a close friendship that I will always treasure. I must have displayed some kind of intellectual potential because they eventually started asking for my input on various curiosities stationed throughout the base. They only did it because I had sworn them complete loyalty and would never be allowed to leave the base anyways, but for me it was just nice to feel included. The base itself was absolutely colossal. They always blindfolded me during transport to any location, but one time I caught a glimpse of the buttons in the elevator. There had to be at least 50 of them on that panel. I remember the first time they showed me one of the lockdown blocks. There were guards posted at every cell, and I heard some very strange noises emanating around me as we traversed the halls. I thought for sure they were about to show me some horrendous beast from the depths of hell and prepared myself accordingly as the howls of unseen things echoed throughout the halls. The lead scientist, Dr. Rosseville, rolled back a two-way mirror curtain and my heart froze from anticipation. In the cell before us, there was nothing more than a human girl in a gray jumpsuit. She was young, maybe 5 years old or so, but there seemed to be nothing out of the ordinary about her. I looked to Dr. Rosseville and he flexed his cranial muscles before pressing a button. I heard the sound of gas seep into the room. A few tense seconds passed when the girl suddenly shrieked like a banshee. Her head tilted back and I saw jagged, needle-like teeth emerge from her mouth. Her jet black eyes then lurched towards us and she lunged at the window. She struck it hard and fell back to the ground, snarling and hissing like some ravenous jackal. Dr. Rosseville then pressed the button again, cutting the gas and posing a question. "You ever seen anything like her, Mr. Blue?" All I could do was shake my head slowly as I watched the young demon child stalk about on the other side of the glass. They found her in the woods outside of Whitehorse with a freshly disemboweled man. She was eating him and appeared unaffected by the sub-zero temperatures. I suddenly felt like vomiting, but I said nothing, only stared back at the unusually gruesome little girl. What the hell was she? Unfortunately, I never was told anything else about her, and I doubt the personnel knew much more anyways. They came to show me a lot of very strange things over the years. A giant brownish orange-haired primate that walked upright and seemed to respond to facial movements. A humanoid-shaped being that was only detectable via infrared equipment. A golden chest that would instantly kill anything that touched it. A 10-foot-tall creature wrapped in vines that emitted bouts of radiation and blended into environments with perfect camouflage. A monstrous fish at least 80 feet in length frozen in nitrogen. Various abhorrent creatures that I'm guessing were the results of relentless genetic tampering. I had never seen anything like it. All of the monstrosities housed there and the secrets buried in their possession. They also asked for my advice on a certain paradoxical phenomenon that had plagued them as well. They told me that for decades there had been hundreds of unsolved cases of human disappearances that seemed to defy all explanation. Young children would be found on cliff edges that they could not have possibly reached, while old and frail people would be discovered dozens of miles away from where they had last been seen, a few hours later. Most of them would never be found at all though. I could almost see the fear dripping from their eyes as they relayed case after case of the recorded incidents, and it was clear, although not said, that they had no idea what the cause was. Unfortunately, neither did I, as it was the first I'd ever heard of the bizarre phenomenon. I told them honestly that I didn't believe my former allies were responsible, but I don't know if that made them feel better or worse. Throughout all of my years there, I had always found one thing peculiar. After all the weird and terrifying things they showed to me, there was never any mention of extraterrestrials. That's what everyone thinks these black site facilities house after all, but nevertheless they made no mention of it. That made me smile a bit when I thought about it, because they had no idea how close they were. The closest thing they had was this weird tentacle creature with a ringed set of teeth in its mouth. It looked almost like an eel, but possessed 4 iridescent green eyes and a ring around its head. It didn't live in the water either, but instead slithered around on the ground in a very swift and very unsettling motion. They said its DNA resembled nothing like anything they had ever found on Earth before, hence the reason they believed, but were not certain of its otherworldly origins. Kevin and I got to talking back in his quarters one night, as the rest of the crew retired for the evening. He shared with me a bit of his brandy, and we were content to just chat as friends late into the night. He told me a lot about himself that he had never mentioned before. He showed me pictures of his wife and his son that had been taken from him. Kevin admitted his son had died in a car crash a couple years back, while his wife passed 2 years later of cancer. It broke my heart to hear that, and I felt sorrow for my dear friend of some 30 years. Kevin was in his early 50s, but you'd never know it with the enthusiasm in his voice. It was during that conversation Kevin ended up mentioning something I found particularly interesting. He told that he believed that if an alien species existed and were advanced enough to traverse the galactic canopy and reach Earth, then they would obviously be quite intelligent. He said he didn't believe in any of the Hollywood depictions of doomsday aliens hellbent on destroying humanity. He thought they'd be a lot more subtle than that. Think about it, you find something intelligent which represents almost no threat to you, and the first thing you do is try to kill it. Kevin asked skeptically as I considered his words for myself. That'd just be a waste, and no species that fancies themselves as advanced beings would do something so brash. At least I hope they wouldn't. He chuckled slightly and shot me a knowing look mixed with a unique intrigue that almost glistened in his gray eyes. Even if they thought we were destroying our own planet or something, why would they care? There are trillions of other planets in the Milky Way alone. They could pick any of them if they wanted natural resources. I chuckled to myself, almost sensing where the conversation was headed. It's not the planets they're after, I replied. Kevin snapped and pointed his finger at me as his face lit up. Exactly. They'd want to study us, learn how we operate, how we organize, and how we live. Kevin's hand motions turned eccentric, and I saw his access badge jostle around his neck. He took another sip of brandy and continued. They'd probably learn more about us than we even know about ourselves. I mean, granted they have to be more intelligent. They could learn up close, understand how humans work. They'd have no need for bloodshed when they could simply and conspicuously integrate into human culture. They have no doubt mastered the art of altering their biology to disguise themselves as humans. I mean, that's nothing when compared with the tech they used to get here, you know. He paused from his enthused monologue and wiped the steam off his glasses. I just sat back, content to let him continue, as I found it fascinating that he could know so much. Aliens, they're not warlords. They're poets, architects, authors, musicians. Beings that wish to create. It is the ultimate calling for an entity so powerful. Kevin took a deep breath and reveled in his own explanation. His speech had turned a bit slurred, and I could see his eyes floating lazily in their sockets. He then met my eyes in a look that he had never given to me before. It was a look that seemed to shed all sense of formality and pose a question which he had long since suspected the answer to. You're not really from Russia, are you? The sudden accusation caught me off guard, and I felt my stomach drop like a lead weight. I didn't say anything, and Kevin just scoffed. You had everyone fooled. And I mean, I was too for the longest time. You had a suitable backstory, authentic sounding accent, all the alibis you gave us checked out. He paused and clasped his hands in front of him. You look so authentic too, but there was one thing you missed. One thing that you just can't fake. He looked me deep in the eyes and fell silent. He didn't have to say it, for I already knew what he meant. The eyes are impossible to truly fake. That night your craft was shot down. What were you doing here? Kevin and I maintained a prolonged eye lock before I finally responded. Reconnaissance. For the first time in decades I dropped the Russian accent, as it was clear there was no longer any reason to lie to my dear friend. And what did you see? Kevin stared into the very depths of my soul as he asked, and I spoke the truth. Beauty, poetry, creators, much like us. Kevin just stared at me for the longest time, as if he were weighing my soul in his mind. I wondered what he planned to do since he had found out, but I didn't ask. Kevin eventually smiled and rose to make his way to the cell door. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a black steel pistol with a long snout. I slowly met his gaze, and he chuckled. Mr. Blue, do you wish to go home? I nodded after pausing to think for a moment. Kevin looked over his weapon and primed it for use. I hope your allies can forgive us. Without another word, he flashed his security badge and the locks on the door gave way. He motioned for me to rise and follow, and so I did. Kevin glanced back and forth down the hallway, but due to the late hour, there was no one around. He and I sprinted down the corridor and onwards to one of the security booths. He flashed his badge as I hid just out of sight. He entered the room, and I heard the noise of a brief scuffle before two bright flashes ended it. Kevin reemerged with wild eyes and beckoned me to follow. He and I dashed down the hallway and reached the massive main shaft elevator soon after. For the first time I entered without a blindfold, and Kevin punched the button to the top floor and the security code required to power it. Security system will be down for a good half hour, but automated distress beacons have already been activated. That gives us about 8 minutes. Kevin dropped the clip from his pistol and popped in a fresh one. I saw spackles of blood on his glasses and cheek and a frenzied look in his eye. "Here, take this." He reached out his hand and held something which I had not seen in decades. The old radio from my craft. I took it, and he and I met eyes as the elevator door opened. It was back to running after that, but a few minutes of it and we had reached an underground parking facility. Kevin quickly unlocked a nearby vehicle and the two of us hopped in as he fired it up. The engine roared to life and Kevin accelerated through the lot. A moment later and we exited the underground facility and I saw my first vision of the night sky in over 4 decades. There were men stationed at the perimeter gates that attempted to stop us, but Kevin didn't flinch. He crashed right through the wire fence on the perimeter, causing multiple lights to activate in our wake. I heard a siren blaring behind us and the silhouettes of people dashing throughout the snow. "There's a suit in the back, put it on." I did as he requested without question and fit the snug polyester garment over my body. It covered every square inch from foot to the nape of my neck and felt incredibly comfortable. "There is a dial on your right side. You can use it to mask your body heat. They're gonna be after you." He tossed a map into my lap and continued barking instructions. "You can contact your friends with that radio, right?" His eyes flashed to me as he slid onto the main road and away from the compound. "Yes," Kevin nodded. "Make your way north, they won't be expecting that. There's a river up there about 30 miles away through the forest. Once you find it, head east until you find a small town. Ask the guy at the post office for Mr. White. He's a friend of mine who's agreed to help you. He'll take it from there." I tried to digest the flow of information as best as I could and remain confident. It had all just happened so suddenly. "I stashed you some MREs in the bag. Should last you a good couple of weeks." Kevin then swerved around a corner and reoriented us onto a new dark road. In the sudden influx of adrenaline, a sudden thought occurred to me. "What happens to you?" Kevin didn't seem to want to acknowledge the question. "Forget about that, just get back to your people." Behind us a flurry of lights suddenly ascended into the night sky. The whirring sound of rotary blades then pierced the tranquil canopy of the blustery night. "Shoot, I had hoped I could get you a bit farther than this." He suddenly slammed on the brakes. My head lurched forward and the car spun back and forth along the icy road. "Take this too." He handed his long barrel pistol over and I hesitantly took it. He and I then met eyes for one final time. "This is where we say goodbye, Mr. Blue." Why are you doing this for me?" Kevin sighed, and I saw a certain sorrow swirl into his ironclad pupils. He stayed silent a moment, and only when the sounds of approaching engines grew louder was he spurred to reply. "You don't belong here. You don't belong in a cage. I don't know where you come from, but I want you to see the ones you love again." His eyes began to water and he jostled his neck before looking me in the eye one final time. "I hope you don't think of us as captors or kidnappers. I hope you see us as you see yourself. I just hope you can understand." A single tear then rolled down his cheek. I put my hand on his shoulder. "I always have and I always will. Thank you, Kevin." I then held out my hand and he grabbed it tight as we shared one final moment before I ventured into the blizzard. The journey from then on was long and arduous, with me spending weeks trudging through snow and frozen forests. Hounds, men, and machines pursued me for days, but somehow I was able to elude their efforts. The terrain was brutal, unrelenting, but eventually I managed to find the river which Kevin had mentioned. By that point, all of my pursuers had long since gone silent. I followed the river and found the town, and soon after the man known as Mr. White. He was a kind man and gladly invited me into his house to avoid the agents. It is there that I have been ever since, awaiting my allies' arrival. They were stunned to hear from me again, but not as stunned as I was to find out the radio was still functional. They weren't entirely sure whether they could even trust me anymore, but I didn't leave them much of a choice when I threatened to go public and expose them to the world. They finally agreed, but admitted it would be months before they could reach me. I expected as much, and thankfully Mr. White allowed me to stay with him and await their eventual arrival. I found out soon after that my dear friend Kevin, to whom I owe my freedom and life, had been found deceased. The authorities ruled it a suicide, gunshot wound to the back of the head, but obviously I have my doubts about that. It truly broke me to learn of my one true friend's demise, but I knew it was what he expected. I like to think that is why he chose to do it, and furthermore it is the reason I am here posting this now. Kevin's legacy deserves to live on, and this is the only way I know how to do it. And with that, we have come full circle to this message you are reading right now. To address the original topic, Area 51 is indeed a reuse. Kevin held a lot of power in his previous role, and he told me all about the operation. The real prize is the Fez, my former prison, somewhere in eastern Alaska, buried beneath the snow with all sorts of abhorrent things in its clutches. If you're going to storm anywhere, that should be the place. Just remember to pack a coat. Kevin was a smart man, brilliant even. If you've managed to make it this far, then I'd like to think you are someone like him. Brave, curious, and with an almost innate sense of wonder that cannot be satiated. It is my hope that Kevin's ideas will live on through you. My allies would never approve of this message, but I know now that they are wrong. Truth is something that all sentient beings should be allowed to perceive, despite how unpleasant it may be to hear it. It was Kevin's belief that the beings he knows as aliens are already here. That instead of murdering humans as is often portrayed in stories, they would blend in and take keen interest in human culture, society and art, write books, poetry and music in hopes of connecting to something truly extraordinary. Something that reminds them of themselves. If Kevin is right, then maybe one day you'll even stumble upon such a story for yourself. Maybe you'll think it nothing more than a work of fiction to entertain you for a while. Maybe the author of said theoretical story would seem like nothing more than your run-of-the-mill internet user. He probably wouldn't just come right out and say it, because that would be entirely too corny. He would probably just leave you the pieces and hope that you could understand the truth for yourself. Maybe you truly are like Kevin, drawn to mystery and prepared to entertain the fantastic. Maybe you'll just dismiss the implications of the words before you because you don't dare believe something so outlandish. Because in the end, truth is not the problem, belief is. Maybe someone will understand who, or more importantly, what I really am. And maybe it will be you. Either way, I've been away for a very long time. It is time for me to go home. Thank you, Kevin. I will always uphold our agreement. There are lots of things about being old that are absolute garbage. Every day, a new part of me seems to hurt and I have one speed. Slow. But there is also a sense of liberation. I finally feel free to tell the truth. After so many years of being tormented by lies, I can't begin to tell you how good this feels. The first lie, the one that began it all, came in a small, windowless room in an anonymous-looking office block. I was fresh out of film school. I was ambitious, bursting with ideas. I was ready for success. I was also thousands of dollars in debt. I needed a job, and when I saw an advert for a filmmaker role, my depressing visions of stacking shelves or serving burgers and fries faded away. It was described as working with a new company based in a city near my home. The starting salary was sweet, more than enough for me to begin digging myself out of my financial hole, and candidates had to have experience working on documentaries. As I sat in that small room, I thought of the film scripts I had written, of the dramatic short I had directed, of the way my imagination had always been praised by my tutors. I was all about the fictional. The door opened and two men walked in. They both wore suits and neither had a necktie. I could not decide if I was overdressed or underdressed in my denim shirt and skinny black tie. They thanked me for coming today, and suit number one began the interview by asking, "How would you sum up your filmmaking?" "I am all about the documentary," I replied. He smiled. I was acing this. Suit number two then asked, "Can you describe your most recent filmmaking project to us?" I thought back to my short, "Girl meets boy, boy meets alien, love is strange." Then I answered. I recorded the life of a young man over the course of 24 hours. I wanted to show the truths that society forces men to mask. Their insecurity, their pain, and their weakness. I was pretty pleased with that off-the-cuff fiction. I gave myself 9 out of 10. It looked like both suits were impressed. Suit number 1 asking, how long was the finished film? Suit number 2 following straight after with, is there anything you did not include, any truths that were too raw? Thinking on all 10 of my toes at once, I went right back to them with 90 minutes and no. Their faces fell as one. 2 mouths drooped, 2 heads leant forwards and both made notes. Damn, I thought, what had I said wrong? 90 minutes was long for TV but would be acceptable in an independent cinema. It must have been my second answer. I smiled, putting myself on the other side of the imaginary camera for once, putting my acting skills to the fore, and said, of course, the truth is relative. One eyebrow perked up, another followed. Tell us more, they said in unison. So I did. I talked and I talked and I talked. A few hours later I was signing a contract. It must have been 20 pages long and I was shown 4 different places to sign, which I duly did. I was thinking of the beer I would drink that night, the car I would be able to get on hire purchases the next day, the girls I would impress. I was only vaguely aware of one of the suits gathering up the contract's papers and placing them in a suitcase. He had left one sheet on the desk. Helpfully, I picked it up and held it out to him. He shook his head. That's your copy, he said. A reminder. I grinned as if I knew what he was talking about, and after shaking hands, I left holding my piece of paper. I read it on the bus back to my apartment for something to do. It had my signature on the bottom. On the top it read Official Secrets Act. I felt queasy by the time I went home. I did not want to spend the rest of my life in prison, so made a solemn promise to myself that I would do as the piece of paper instructed and never breathe a word about what I did for my new employers. Not sober, not drunk, not trying to impress even the prettiest girl into bed. My lips were sealed no matter what I was asked to film. No problems here, I told myself and began to drink. The next morning the bus rattled and swayed as I headed back to the office for the first day of my new job. I hoped it would be an easy one. A few introductions, a gentle brainstorming session, an early finish. I got off the bus and went to reception. I signed in, was given a security pass and told to report to the parking lot out the back. I headed there and my heart sank when I saw one of the suited men from my interview loading camera equipment into a truck. He waved at me and said, "Look lively. We need to be on location with cameras rolling in an hour's time." I swallowed down bile. "Great," I said. The suspension on the truck made the bus seem like a smooth glide over green fields. The throb in my head became a jackhammer, and my stomach bubbled and cramped and felt like it was going to go full erupting volcano on me at any moment. To this day, I do not know how I did not projective vomit, but I made it and was left unpacking the equipment while Suit walked up to the house we had parked outside and pressed on the buzzer. We had already been buzzed through a tall security gate and driven up a winding driveway. I paused to wipe sweat from my brow and silently cursed brewers of beer everywhere and looked up at the house. House was actually an insult. This place was a mansion. It was 3 stories high, with ornate pillars either side of the door, and looked immaculate. Heaven help any bird that dared crap on these walls, I thought, and followed Suit through the now open doors, my arms loaded with the tools of the filmmaker's trade. Inside was even more impressive. Wooden floors polished within an inch of their lives, paintings that looked like they belonged in museums, and statues. Real for goodness statues. I almost fell over a trailing cable I was carrying while gawping at one of a semi-naked lady playing a lute. Eventually, we reached a massive room with a mahogany table at its center. A white-haired man was sitting at it, poring over a sprawling pile of paper. Suit stood silently. I tried not to drop anything. The man, thankfully for my aching arms, looked up. A familiar smile spread across a familiar face. I am not going to go so far as to name the man I now recognized. I do not think that would be fair to his family, but I will say that Suit nodded deferentially and said, "Good morning, Senator." "And a fine morning it is," the man replied and emerged from behind his desk to come and shake hands with both of us. He wore a white suit that probably cost more than the camera and sound gear I now placed on the floor. Whoever did the floors had possibly also given his face a polish. He sparkled and chuckled as he said, "So, you've come to show the good people of the state how I spend my days." "We certainly have," Suit replied and turned to me as if I knew exactly what was meant to happen next. The senator saved me. "Shall we start with a shot of me working at my desk?" he said. It was one of those questions which wasn't really a question. Suit grinned. "Sounds perfect." Now up to speed, I began to set up the equipment. The rest of the day passed in setup after setup as we recorded the senator, meeting visitors, chatting with his head gardener, making an important phone call, and standing looking thoughtfully out of a window. We had brought no lighting with us, and when Suit and the senator agreed on a shot of him closing a folder holding a document he had just signed and putting the top back on his gold fountain pen would be fantastic, I had to point out the light levels would not work. Suit glared at me, but the senator looked wise, an expression I had seen slip on and off his face with remarkable ease all day, and said, "Tomorrow is another day," and that, as they say, was a wrap. I was left to pack up and manhandle everything back to the truck. A couple of hours later, I was back on the bus, a snoring man drooling on my shoulder. I was smiling from ear to ear. I was a professional filmmaker, so what if it was a vanity project? It was a beginning, and I daydreamed all the way home about my first feature opening in the years to come and the rave reviews that would follow. Maybe, I wondered, the senator might want to finance it, or point me in the direction of his wealthy friends with a hearty recommendation that, "This young man is super talented." He always ensured I was beautifully lit. I woke early the next morning and arrived at the office before. We returned to the senator's mansion, but it turned out he had been called away on urgent business. We took some exteriors while we were there and then set off for the next assignment. As we headed along roads I did not recognize, I asked Suit what we would be filming. Channeling the senator, he looked sage as he replied, "Son, one lesson about working for the government is not to ask questions. If you need to know, when you need to know, someone will tell you. Makes life much simpler, I assure you." To tell the truth, stupid as it makes me look, I had not realized up to that point that I was working for the government. The Official Secrets Act document I had signed had not specified this, and my head had been packed with too many other things to work it out for myself. The new startup in the advert had been baloney then. Not a problem, I decided. Because I was a professional filmmaker. What sweet words those were. After about 30 minutes we left the main road and followed a track through verdant countryside until we pulled up next to a small river. "We need to get a series of close-ups of the water," Suit told me. "We want to capture its natural beauty." "Can do," I answered and got out the equipment. The water was crystal clear and rich with darting fish. The sunlight glinting off its surface was perfect. I gave Suit a thumbs up and, shots in the can, we were soon back on the move. We stayed on quiet roads until we reached a high, wire fence topped with curling steel barbs. An armed security guard stepped out of a booth and asked to see our ID before opening a gate to let us in. From bucolic to barbed wire, I thought but kept my mouth shut. No questions, I remembered. We passed through 2 more checkpoints before we reached our destination. I recognized it from news articles. It was a new power plant funded with multi-millions from the government. It was about the ugliest thing I had ever seen, and my good spirits dipped as I did as I was asked and filmed a series of exteriors. Next came an interview with the plant manager conducted as he took us on a tour of the inside of the concrete and steel monstrosity. That wrapped, we were heading back to the truck when I noticed a small river running behind the plant. Absent-mindedly I wandered over to it and was sickened to see the water was filthy and had dead fish floating on the surface. I realized Suit was standing behind me when he said, "When we get back to the office, you will edit in the other river." I spun around. What he was asking was appalling. He smiled and said, "Mom and Pop and Junior don't want to see dead fishes on the evening bulletin while they are hoovering up their meatballs. They'd much prefer to think their taxes are making the world a better place. They'll sleep much better." He stepped closer to me, almost touching, and added, "Do you see?" It was a question, wasn't a question, and I did not argue. And from that moment, I was complicit. I told myself many times over the weeks that followed that I was doing this on my terms, that I was gaining experience and making contacts and building up a portfolio. But in truth, I was part of a machine that covered up unpalatable truths with sugar-coated films. I recorded government officials supervising the handing out of food parcels in a poverty-stricken district, all filmed out on a lot near the office, with actors playing the grateful recipients of the aid. I shot a film about a government workshop where the long-term unemployed learned new skills. From their glazed eyes, I could tell they had been given dope before the camera rolled. These and many more left me feeling disgusted with myself. By the time we rolled up back at the senator's mansion, I had almost forgotten that first day of filming. I traipsed inside carrying the equipment and wondering if he knew what was happening. With his power and reach, he must have, I decided. Maybe it was even his idea. I set up in a grand dining room as I had been instructed. Sue had told me we were here to film the senator dining with his wife. We were going to capture a simple scene that families across the state would recognize, and then he headed off, telling me he was going to let the senator know we would be ready for him in 10 minutes. I glanced up at the ornate candelabra and worked out my angles so it would not be in the shot. Perhaps I could edit in footage of a lethargic lava lamp later to make the scene more down to earth. I smiled bitterly and was checking the sound levels when she walked in. She was beautiful. Her dark auburn hair was loose over her shoulders and she wore an elegant black dress. I stood there, feeling very naive and young, as she made her way across the room to a drinks cabinet. She started to pour a drink. "I'm not going to ask you if you want one," she said. "I know it won't be allowed." She turned then and sipped her drink, and I noticed the bruising around her eye, the cut in her lip. "I assume with some clever lighting and editing you can make these disappear," she said. "Or do I need more makeup?" I realized I had been staring and looked away embarrassed. She smiled sadly and poured herself another drink. "I suppose you think I'm pathetic?" she asked. "The wife living off her wealthy husband and putting up with this." She reached up and touched her mouth. "I don't think that," I managed to say. I was shocked and angry. She looked into her drink, swirled the amber liquid around. "It's not always been like this. He was sweet and loving when we first married, but as his career has soared, he has changed. He was always ambitious, but now he is driven by pure greed. For the finest food, which he gorges himself on, for the best wines which he drinks until he passes out, and for pain. He smiles when he hits me. He smiles his famous smile which he turns on for the cameras and the crowds." She lowered her hand. "It's wrong," I said. "He should not hit you. No one should." She finished her drink and we stood there in silence. I felt lost. What could I do? Suddenly, I knew. I reached out, took the camera off the tripod and hoisted it onto my shoulder. "It's time for people to see the truth," I said. I wanted to expose the senator, but for me to do that she would be exposed as well. She looked at me and I waited for her consent. And then we heard the scream. It was a man's voice, crying out in terror and pain. Neither of us hesitated. We ran towards the sound. "It's coming from my husband's office," she said. I turned the camera on. I did not know what new aberration the senator had committed, but I was determined to capture it on film. I followed her into the office, heard her gasp, saw her body stiffen in shock before I too saw dark liquid pooling on the floor. It was blood, I realized, in a trail that led out through open French windows into the garden. The camera still rolling, I followed the trail. Watching the footage afterwards, as I stepped out onto the grass, the camera began to shake. The image blurs and then it comes back into focus, and there is the man I called Suit. His suit stained with blood. The flesh of his neck and his face has been ripped open. Skin and muscle is being pulled upwards and torn away by a creature from a nightmare. Its skin was drawn tight across its bones, and its eyes were sunk in hollows. Its mouth hung open, and with its teeth it was ripping at the remains of the dead man cradled in its arms. Its white blood-splattered suit hung off its frame, and still the camera rolled. I was not even aware I was holding it until she put her hand on my other shoulder. "We have to get away," she whispered. I could not reply. I could barely breathe. Fear held me rooted to the spot. "Before he sees us," she said. He, I thought, her husband, the thing he had become. I began to cry as the terror of what I was witnessing washed over me in cold waves. She took my arm and led me away, and all the while the creature gorged and bit and slavered on its human feast. After this, what happened has stayed with me as moments. The camera had run out of film. My memory shows me flashes. The truck starting, with her at the wheel. Road signs slipping past. A motel room, me lying sobbing in her lap. Then we drive on to a new place. A new anonymous town as we ran away. This was 40 years ago, and every day up to her death last fall, I thought how grateful I was to have met her. We never married, but we lived as a couple, sharing everything a man and woman can. We made our home in a cold, distant place, where on winter nights I learned of ancient legends, of men corrupted and transformed. of creatures whose hunger can never be sated. I did not pick up a camera again, though I kept my old equipment in a shed along with reels of film. I am going to carry everything out to the woods and burn it now. It is time to rid myself of the past. I am an old man, I am tired, and I want to be able to close my eyes and rest without remembering legends made real. I was fresh out of college, ambitious, hardworking, and in debt. I applied for hundreds of jobs and attended dozens of interviews, all while working the night shift at a 24-hour convenience store. But I kept hitting the brick wall of not having the right experience. It was so frustrating. I knew I could do 90% of what the job specs asked for. The other 10% I was sure I could work out when I needed to. It was a no every time though, and it did not matter how many times I read on feedback emails that I was very talented and the interviewers had enjoyed meeting me. Each and every rejection sucked. I did not need compliments, I needed a damn job. So I wasn't feeling very positive as I filled in yet another application form for a job I had seen online. It wasn't even a proper job. It was for an internship with a research company, unpaid and for 3 months. For the experience, I told myself as I fought to finish the form. I finally did. Just before I had to leave for work, I pressed send. Then I threw on my coat and hurried out the door. The shelves would not stack themselves. The next morning I was dragging myself into bed when I noticed I had a reply to my latest application showing on my phone. Thinking, at least the rejections are getting quicker, I almost did not read it. But my finger twitched and I opened, and to my amazement, I was told I had been accepted onto the internship program. All I needed to do was read and accept the terms and conditions. But who does that, right? I scrolled down and accepted, then rolled over and went to sleep. The alarm on my phone woke me at 1 in the afternoon. I couldn't remember setting an alarm, but obviously I must have. Then I thought, the internship, and rushed to look at the message again. There it was, please arrive promptly at 3 p.m. for your induction. This was followed by an address. It was way out of town, but thanks to the alarm I had time. I am so on it, I told myself and hurried for the shower. As it was, I was almost late. There was a line to get through the security checks at the entrance to the building. The place didn't look anything special. It could have been a stock image brought up from a search for big faceless office block. When my turn came, I was asked to empty my pockets and walk through a body scanner. This was a fancy looking piece of kit and gave me a 360 degrees going over. I felt kind of violated, to be honest, and as I stepped out, I was about to protest that I had not consented to be searched in this way when I remembered the terms and conditions. That had been a long list, and I guessed, in there somewhere there had been a line about intimate electronic searches. Better than a latex glove up the butt. I decided and accepted a lanyard with my face looking out from it. It wasn't a great photograph. I was wearing my sweatshirt rather than the white shirt and tie I had on. Hang on, I thought and turned to ask one of the people at the security desk where they had got this picture from when I heard someone say my name. Alan Chambers. The woman who had spoken was maybe 30 and had on a dark blue business suit. Her blonde hair was in a ponytail and she wore what I believe are called sensible shoes. I was not checking her out in a seedy way, I was just, looking. I blushed anyway. She seemed oblivious to my discomfort and held out her hand. I'm Jane Mitchell, though everyone calls me Jane 1. Is that because there are 2 Jane Mitchells that work here? I asked as we shook hands. She smiled. There used to be. Now, let's get you to work. Looking back, the short space of time between application, acceptance, and me actually sitting at a workstation and being assigned tasks should have made me realize something was off. The fact they had a picture of me and I did not know how should have bothered me more, but I was just too plain excited. After months and months of frustration, I was finally getting somewhere. The only issue I had was that I hadn't resigned from my job at the store. Don't sweat the small stuff, I told myself and focused on the task at hand. My desktop was showing 12 different shared screens. Each was of a domestic setting, and by clicking into one I could enlarge it. The one I chose first looked to be a view of a home office. There was an old-fashioned calendar on a wall, a cactus in a pot, and a bookshelf. I was clearly seeing this room through a webcam on a computer. The next setting I enlarged was a kitchen. It was a spacious room with pots lined up on a wall hanger in the background. My task was to observe the activity taking place and note down timings of anything unusual. I had been told that another experienced member of staff would then review the footage. Both the first 2 rooms were empty, so I checked out a third, and there was a young man, a bit older than me. He looked to be working on a device while lying on a sofa. To me, the young man's behavior seemed perfectly normal. So, should I move on to someone else and come back to him later in the hope that he would be doing something weird? I rubbed my face, a habit I have when the cogs are moving inside my head. This was tricky and fascinating. "How's it going, Alan?" I turned to see Jane 1 was standing behind me. For the life of me, though she had told me her actual surname, Jane 1 had stuck in my mind. "Okay," I said. "I suppose. I guess I just need to get used to thinking in a certain way, to be able to decide quickly what constitutes unusual." Jane 1 frowned and checked the tablet she was holding. After a moment she looked up and said, "Your records show acute observational skills." I tried to remember the responses I had given in the application form that she must have been referring to, but I drew a blank. I tried to look, if not wise then at least competent, and said, "Of course, that is a key skill of mine." This seemed to do the trick as Jane 1 looked less perturbed and started to move on. There were more people at workstations that ran the length of the room. I guess she was a busy lady with a lot of people to supervise. But a question had just occurred to me. I said. "Ms. 1. I mean, Jane." She paused. "Yes, Alan. The people I am observing, well, presumably they know they're being watched because they must have given us permission. But won't that change their behavior?" Jane 1 looked at me like I had just slipped down a couple of rungs of the evolutionary ladder and said, "They don't know they are being observed, Alan. What would be the point if they did?" Then she walked away. I rubbed my face. A whole host of new questions were forming, but they all got shoved to one side when the woman screamed. It was a small sound, coming from my computer, and I could not spot who it was at first glance. Then on one of the screens I saw a woman running into a room. I clicked to enlarge and could see that she was in a bedroom. The computer camera that I was observing through must have been on a bedside table or chair. Either way, I had clear view as the man walked into the room. He was breathing heavily as he approached the woman. She backed away from him, but there was no place to go. And then he hit her, and he kept hitting her. I took out my phone to dial 911, but realized I had no idea where this appalling assault was taking place. I stood up, looked around the other workstations. Would anyone else know? I doubted it, but I knew who probably would. "Jane," I shouted, "get Jane 1. I don't know if someone called for her, or she heard me herself, but a minute later she made her way over to me. I felt sick at what I had seen and struggled to get my words out. "A woman has been attacked. I saw everything. We need to tell the police. Give them the details." On the screen, the woman was alone again. She lay on the floor not moving. I did not know if she was still breathing. Jane did not interrupt me, did not ask any questions. I don't think she even glanced at the screen. When she spoke, it was in a calm voice. "Sit down, Alan. Your job is to observe and pass your contribution on to the next stage in the system." "We have to help," I gasped. "The system will help. I believe that because I trust the system." "Do you, Alan?" "Yes," I replied, but... She talked over me. "Good, now please go back to work." The rest of that first day passed in a blur. I felt disorientated and confused. I tried to concentrate on what I was seeing on the screens, but I could not stop thinking about the woman who had been attacked. Even though, shortly after Jane had finished speaking to me, I watched as police or paramedics, I'm not sure as I did not recognize their uniforms, arrived and began to tend to the woman before taking her away on a stretcher. The system had worked, I supposed. Perhaps a neighbor had heard the screams and called the authorities. I did not know, and by the time I left the building around midnight, after another turn through the body scanner, I decided I would not be going back. I'd email, say that internship was not one for me, thank them for the experience, some kind of BS along those lines. I decided to do this when I had a clearer head, but after I got home I could not go to sleep for ages. And when the alarm on my phone went off, I woke with a start. I looked at my phone, saw it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. What the hell? I had not set that alarm. I rubbed my face, realized I had new messages. The first was my bank. It said I had received a payment, one that ran into tens of thousands of dollars, enough to pay off my student loans in one full swoop. What the hell? I said it aloud this time. The second was from Jane 1. As per the terms and conditions you accepted, now you have formally entered the internship program. We have deposited an amount equal to your debt in your account. Should you not complete the program, we will require immediate repayment with an administration fee of 80% of the original amount added to the outstanding balance. We look forward to seeing you at the office later today. P.S. Nice pajamas. I pulled the bed sheet up to my neck and looked at my laptop. It was open and facing me. I just about made it to the toilet before I was violently sick. Resigning there and then was now out of the question. I had been screwed financially before I joined the program. Add on another 80% and I would be hounded by debt for decades. I was pretty angry by the time I arrived at the office. The security guard who processed me gave me a dirty look throughout. "What's your problem?" I snapped as I stepped out of the body scanner. "Just concerned about your heart rate and temperature. They've been through the roof for the last 2 hours," he replied. "How?" I began, but had no need to ask the question as it dawned on me. Like a lot of people, I had an app on my phone which registered how many steps I took a day. That and clearly much more. I went to the restroom, turned my phone off, decided to take the battery out as well. Swearing under my breath, I went to have things out with Jane 1. I had a growing list with spying on me at the top. A man I had never seen before was waiting for me outside the restroom door. He held his hand out, displayed all the signs of a very good dental plan, and said, "Hi Alan, I'm Tony. I'm your supervisor for the day." "Jane," I began. "I want to speak to." "Jane is first floor. Today you'll be working with me in basement. If you'd like to come with me." He swept his hands in the direction of the lift. I counted to 10, promised myself that before I left the office, I would find a way out of this mess, then followed him to the lift. Tony wore a dark blue suit, a subtly striped tie, and black shoes. His hair was parted immaculately. He smelled of something woody. I could feel the sweat gathering in my armpits and hoped he was wearing enough expensive deodorant for two. The doors clicked open and Tony led me out into a gray corridor. For my exit plan, I needed options. I decided to try sounding him out. "Do people ever drop out?" I asked him as casually as I could. He looked thoughtful and, after a moment's pause, he replied, "Self-termination does occasionally occur. Or, sometimes we will decide it's simply not working and call time on an internship. It's such a shame when this happens, to see a young person become one of life's leftovers." "Why do you ask, Alan? Are you thinking of leaving us?" "No," I answered, still trying to process what he had said. Tony nodded. "Glad to hear that." We had reached a double set of steel doors and Tony was opening them by placing his hand on a scanner fixed to the wall. They whooshed close to silently and we stepped through into a massive open space. Lines of desks with laptops on them ran the length of the room. There were seats by the desks. I noticed that each seat had restraints on the arms, and that there were more restraints by the legs of the desks. Something cold touched the back of my neck. I reached round, realized it was sweat trickling down my skin. What was this place? I wondered. Tony, for his part, beamed like a proud parent on awards day. He clamped his hands together and said, "Today, Alan, I am going to introduce you to our latest project. I can tell you, there is significant excitement about it at all levels of the organization. It could, we believe, significantly improve the way we run the country." I held up my hand. "Wait," I said. "The government runs the country, the people we elect." He looked at me with what seemed like pity in his eyes, then shook his head. "Alan," he said, "the men and women you see braying into the camera every day, are you seriously telling me they are fit to run this country?" I could not answer. This was one shock too many. He must have taken my silence for acquiescence because he went on. "This building is one outlying office of the most effective administration there has ever been. We have been covertly in charge of this country for more than half a century, and that is why this is the greatest nation in the goddamn world." He slapped his fist into the palm of his other hand, straightened his tie and said, "Now, if you will move over to the wall and stand behind the safety line." I looked to my left. A red line had been painted on the floor. I had a very bad feeling about this, but did as I was told. My legs felt very shaky as I moved behind the red line. Tony joined me, still beaming. A buzzer sounded, and at the far side of the room a large shutter door opened. The smell hit me instantly. It was something rancid. I wanted to ask Tony what it was, but I could not speak anymore because the first of them had appeared through the door. Their clothes were filthy and torn. Each had a lanyard. These were not held on by a cord, but fixed with a bolt directly into their chests. Their skin, where it was exposed, was shriveled and, in places, fallen away completely to reveal the flesh beneath. None spoke, though their mouths moved constantly. Tony must have seen my attention was fixed on this because he leaned over and said in a quiet voice, "Their tongues are clipped during induction." I looked at him blankly. There were men wearing overalls and carrying long tasers flanking the things that had entered the room. If one started to veer off to the side, it was shocked back into its place. Soon the smell of burning flesh was added to the foul, sickly sweet odor that now filled the room. I was aware that my heart was beating at a crazy speed, that I was now soaked in sweat, but all I could do was stand and stare as they continued to shuffle forwards. I was too scared to move, too scared to speak. Prodded and shouted at by the men in overalls, the things each sat at a desk. As they did so, the restraints clamped closed around their wrists and ankles. Eventually all of them were seated before one of the laptops, which were powering up. From where I stood, I could see images start to flicker on the laptops, one after another in rapid succession. Slowly at first, but then picking up speed, the things started to press the keyboards in front of them, one finger at a time. Soon they were in sync with the changing images. My God, I realized they were responding to what they were being shown. I tried to say, they are absolutely amazing, Tony said. You see, Alan, the zombie brain is uncluttered. It does not worry about what the other zombies think. It is not distracted by romantic or sexual feelings. It does not have personal ambition or fear. The zombies are ideal. For what? I managed to ask. To help us create the algorithms that will guide every aspect of the lives of people all across this country for years to come. I could not respond. I stood and stared as waves of pure fear passed through me. I can't tell you how long the zombies were kept at their task, but when a new buzzer sounded and their restraints clicked open, I felt a glimmer of hope that the worst was over. I had no idea that this waking nightmare was only just beginning. The zombies got slowly to their feet and were herded towards one corner of the room where there were no desks. Once again a buzzer sounded and a hatch opened in the ceiling. A glistening slab fell through, and then another. It was meat, I realized. Blood dripped from fat chunks of matter now rushing towards the ground. The zombies did not hesitate. Afterwards, Tony took me back to the lift and up to the ground floor. He got me a soda from a vending machine and told me it would help settle my stomach. And then he said he would see me tomorrow. I did not go home. I walked the streets for a long time and am still walking. It's close to dawn and I have decided I am not going back to the office. I am going off-grid, to somewhere remote. I have to do this. I have to get away. Tony said that the interns that don't make it become life's leftovers. Seeing the zombies feeding, I understood what he meant. It was not the way that they tore at the meat with their teeth or the drool speckled with bone and gristle hanging from their chins. It was when the meat was released from the hatch in the ceiling and landed in a pile on the floor. It was glimpsing the movement among the slabs of meat, the hand raised, the terrified face, before the zombies began their feast. My grandfather was a combat pilot. Even though he always felt distant, I liked him. When I grew older, I realized that he was always aware, always looking for any signs of danger. Shell shock, PTSD, it has many names. My mother told me that he didn't used to be like that he changed when he came back from Vietnam. My grandpa's profession was likely the reason why I was obsessed with space, astronauts, planes, and pilots. We used to talk about it when we were together. He was a really skilled and high-ranking officer in the army, and he knew some people, even a couple of really well-known astronauts. When I once asked him if he met anyone who went to the moon, he simply replied, "Don't ever talk to me about the moon, boy. It's a dark and evil place." He died back in 2004 from natural causes. About 2 months ago, we decided to renovate my grandparents' old house. While clearing out the attic, I found an old metallic box. In the box, there was a number of things which I assumed belonged to my grandfather. There was a military medal, a stack of papers, and an old picture of my grandfather and 2 other men I didn't recognize. My grandpa looked around 40, so I assumed that the picture was taken in the 70s. All of them were wearing spacesuits, and the scene was a typical backdrop used by NASA, but the logo was missing. Only a blank monochrome background. The mission patch was titled Dawnbreaker. I didn't understand anything. My grandfather was an astronaut. Why did he never tell anyone about this? Dawnbreaker. I never heard about such mission. It must have been covered up really well. But why? I found the answers in the papers on the bottom of the box. I'll rewrite the literal contents below, but I warn you that many people might find it very disturbing. My dear family, if you ever find this, I must confess something. In 1972, I wasn't in Vietnam. I wasn't supposed to tell anyone, but if you have found this, it probably doesn't matter anymore. Back in 1965, me and a handful of other pilots were selected for a non-public team of astronauts who would participate in covert missions in space for our government. We wouldn't get the glory and fame of regular astronauts, but our country needed us, and so we were there. In early 1972, we were told that for an unspecified period of time, our country had a secret satellite orbiting the moon. They never told us what it did or why it was there, just that a few weeks prior, it had crashed to the surface on the dark side of the moon for unknown reasons and that the data it carried was crucial. The government needed to recover it, and thus was sending me and 2 other astronauts to reclaim the satellite's memory module. The equipment of the planned Apollo 18 mission was essentially transferred to us. From what we'd been told, the Apollo team was furious. They had a reason to be after all. It seemed that whoever we'd been under was much more powerful than NASA. The whole mission was top secret, obviously. I was officially deployed to Vietnam, while in reality we underwent extensive training for the mission. After a couple of months, we found ourselves standing on the launch pad in front of this beast of a rocket that would take us to the moon. I was the mission commander, while Lieutenant Carver was the Lunar Excursion Module LEM pilot, and Lieutenant Ackerman was the Command Service Module CSM pilot. The flight to the moon took roughly 3 days. After arriving, we made a couple of orbits around it. Each time we flew behind the horizon created by the moon itself, I felt a bit of helplessness when our communication to the whole world went dark, as the signal got obscured by the spherical mass of rock and dust below us. The dark side of the moon was nothing like the light side, which we see on almost a daily basis. Instead of smooth gray fields and tranquil lunar seas, it was completely covered in dark, deep craters and holes, like as if it was being slowly eaten away by the universe itself. It was finally decided to begin the descent to the surface. Me and Carver exchanged wishes of good luck with Ackerman, and in the lunar module named Charon, we separated from the CSM named Trinity. After we announced Charon has touched down, our response wasn't cheers and applause, but just mere "This is Trinity, congratulations Charon. I will relay the news on the other side. Be safe out there, pals." Just like that, we became cut off from the rest of the world. Ackerman was our only link. While he was above the light side, he could communicate with ground command, and while above the dark side he could communicate with us. Never both at once. Even though the CSM's orbital period was roughly 2 hours, we would be in touch for only about 35 minutes each orbit. We landed on a flat plane inside a huge crater. Contrary to what some people believe, the sun shines at the dark side of the moon the same way as the light side. The amount of light depends on the lunar phase. It was still shining daylight in the place where we landed, but we knew that it would go dark in a few days. I felt excited and curious about what awaits us in this alien world. We waited for about an hour and a half to get the command's reply from Ackerman and spent the time by preparing our suits. Command sends their congratulations. Here to proceed with the recovery. Everything was dead silent as I stepped on the surface of the moon. I tried to think of something excessively inspiring to say, but that those times were already over. With Carver, we assembled the rover, and after planting our flag next to our spacecraft, we drove off. As we drove across the surface, I saw what I thought was a flash, like a glare reflected by something metallic in the far distance. Since it was fairly common to see flashes of light because of an interesting physical phenomenon caused by the space radiation interacting with our eyes, I didn't give it much thought and soon forgot about it. After driving for a couple of hours, we reached the satellite, or what was left of it. We immediately noticed that something wasn't right. There were dozens of footprints around the probe, leading to a set of 2 tracks dragging out into the distance. "What the hell is this?" asked Carver in disbelief. "I don't know, but it seems that somebody got what we came for before us," I replied. Both the tracks and the footprints were different than ours. Whoever took the data wasn't here under the American flag. As I expected, we didn't find the data box. We found the part where it was supposed to be, but it was missing. Luckily for us, we were just in contact with Ackerman, so we reached out to him to describe our findings. "This doesn't make any sense. Who would take it? Russians? They don't even have a lunar program. Even if somebody took it, how could we not be aware of that? How can the Russians land on the moon without us noticing?" He responded. "As far as we know, the Russians have no idea that we are here, said Carver over the radio. "We're going to follow the trail." I cut off their conversation. "Are you guys sure about this?" asked Ackerman. "Hell, I'm not sure about this. We're clearly missing something here, but I'll do as you say, Cap," responded Carver. "Yes, if whatever was on that probe was so important for 2 countries to send people here to retrieve it, we have to find out what happened to it," I replied. "Copy that, Charon. I'll relay your whereabouts to command as soon as I can. Be careful out there." Our oxygen was about at half capacity now, but we moved on with hopes of solving this mystery. It wasn't long until I saw something in the distance. As we got closer, I realized that it was a spacecraft. Its design was different than ours, and it was decorated with a flag of the Soviet Union. I couldn't explain why, but I felt that something was really odd about the spacecraft. If there really was Russians with us on the moon, they would have picked up our comms long ago, so there wasn't a point in hiding. "To the unidentified Soviet lander, this is the crew of Dawnbreaker, please respond. We know you're here, we have you in sight." Nothing. We attempted to contact them several times again in both Russian and English, but always received only silence in response. We got closer and I realized why I found the spacecraft odd before. It looked like it had been there for a while. We didn't see much of the interior through the small windows, which had been covered with something from the inside. "Our air is running low, and I don't like this, Miller. We should really head back now," said Carver with clear uneasiness in his voice. "I know, but we have to find out what's going on here." It took some time until we figured out a way to open the airlock, and no one was home. The inside was a mess. The interior was splattered with brownish red fluid, presumably contents of one of the many opened food packages on the floor. Or was it? No. I quickly pushed that thought out of my head. It was a 2-seater craft. There was a small amount of leftover supplies and samples, but no signs of the satellite's black box. There was a spacesuit hung on the wall near the airlock. 2 occupants and 1 spacesuit with a clearly missing name tag. We both quickly realized that the other one must still be out there somewhere along with its occupant. At this point, we were really low on oxygen, so we rushed to get back to our spacecraft. As we reached Charon with the last bits of oxygen in our suits, I realized something. "Tell me, Carver, was it just me or did we not pass the wreckage on our way back?" I asked. "Fuck, don't even mention it. It wasn't there, that's right." We shared our intriguing discovery with Ackerman later, and he was as surprised as was Command when he informed them in turn. That night I took watch for the first 4 hours. It wasn't really a night since the sun was still shining, but for the sake of timekeeping, we referred to the time when we slept as night. When it was finally my turn to sleep, I had a dream about following the flash that I saw the previous day. I walked on until I found the same spacesuit from the Russian craft just lying there in the dust. The limbs were twisted and contorted in gruesome ways, but it was clear that someone or something was inside that suit. I approached and slowly began opening the sunshield that obscured the inside of the helmet. I looked in terror as I saw the inside. It was my face, covered with brownish red blood. In place of eyes, there were only 2 gaping holes. The next day we started picking up something on an unused channel of our radio. It was a faint signal coming from somewhere in the crater. We tried to patch it to the speakers, but it didn't make any sense. It was just a repeating sound resembling a person vocalizing the sound of a single letter or vowel, but stretched to about 3 seconds followed by an equally long pause. It was very distorted, and it clearly wasn't a loop since each sound was just slightly different than the previous one. We ate and once again prepared for moonwalk. It was darker than the other day. The sun was still shining, but it was steadily creeping its way under the horizon. We followed the source of the signal for about an hour when we found something lying in the dust in front of us. I tensed as I looked closer and found out what it was. It was a spacesuit, the same as the one in the Russian lander. "Well, it looks like we found our missing friend," said Carver with disbelief. I didn't say anything. I simply jumped off the rover and slowly, silently approached the suit. "What are you doing, Miller?" continued Carver. Just as I was about to open the sunshield with my shaking hands, the suit came alive and grabbed my hand. With the sound traveling through our suits, I heard a weak pomagite, meaning help in Russian. We carried him to our lander. The patch on his suit revealed his identity as Tarkov. He was in shock and hypoxic. I don't know how long or why he was just lying there, but he was lucky to be alive. For the next couple of hours, he fell in and out of consciousness. He eventually woke up. Our Russian was bad, but luckily, he spoke English enough for us to understand each other. He didn't remember why he was there, what had happened to him and his crew, or what his mission was. When I looked out of the window, I realized that our flag was gone. There were no footprints. It looked like as if it simply vanished. At this point, each one of us was really concerned, and we asked to terminate the mission. The command refused, explaining that the recovery of the satellite's data was of paramount importance. We decided to continue our search tomorrow and went to sleep. I again had the same nightmare as the day before. I woke up terrified and drenched in sweat. I saw Tarkov standing by the window and looking out. He then walked over to Carver and just stood there looking at him while he slept for about a minute or two. Silently, I asked him, "Tarkov, what are you doing?" But he just mumbled something like them or went and lied down. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, and I kept an eye on him, but nothing interesting happened. The next day we found a picture or a map of the crater we were at in a pocket in Tarkov's suit. There was a point a few miles from where we were that was marked with a cross. Tarkov didn't know what was there, but I soon realized that it was right in the direction where I saw the flash on the first day. We had to check it out. Me and Carver later took off and headed towards this mysterious target, while Tarkov stayed in the Charon. In reality, our rover had enough power to carry all three of us, but I insisted that it didn't and that he should stay behind. "I don't trust this guy," I said to Carver after I was sure that Tarkov was out of range of our short-range radio. We land on the moon. We don't find the box and suddenly the probe is gone. Then we find a supposed to be dead Russian who doesn't remember when was the last time he took a shit. And now we're heading towards an inconspicuous place that was marked on his map he knows nothing about. You bet I don't trust him. Hell, I don't trust a single step I take in that direction, he replied. "What are we going to do with him?" he asked later. "I don't know yet, but we can't take him with us. Neither the LEM or CSM is built for an extra passenger." "You know that," I responded. "And I'm afraid he knows that too," replied Carver. The sun was setting. After driving for a while, we reached something that puzzles me to this day. Right there in front of us was something I can only describe as a three-sided pyramid. It was about 10 feet tall and its surface was completely smooth and black as night. "What in the world is this?" asked Carver with a shiver in his voice. We walked around it and took pictures. "What the fuck?" I suddenly heard through my radio. I turned around and saw Carver frozen in place, staring at something. There, in the remaining faint light, was a spacesuit about 20 feet away from us. I recognized the missing name patch and realized that it was the suit from the Russian spacecraft. It was standing upright, on its feet. The sunshield was open to reveal a sight that terrifies me to this day. It was empty. The suit was empty, but it was standing upright. I came back to my senses after I heard a crackling noise coming from my radio. "You don't belong here," it spoke in a low, deep, distorted voice. Then out of nowhere, I was blinded by an intense flash of light. When I recovered, the thing was gone. "Tarver, are you alright?" I asked. He was silent at first and then replied, "Man, fuck NASA, fuck the army, fuck the satellite, fuck this whole mission. I want to get out of here, now." Without any debate, we ran to the rover and drove off back to Charon. When we came back, the sun had already fallen below the horizon and it was almost completely pitch black. The airlock was open and Tarkov was standing in front of the module in his suit. In the rush, we completely forgot about him. I approached him and started, "Listen, Tarkov, there is something you." I stopped when I noticed that he was holding something behind his back, but it was too late. He swung and struck me with a sharpened rod. I hit my head on the inside of my helmet and Daze fell to the ground. When the ringing in my ears stopped, I saw him and Carver fighting in the dust. I stood up and thrown myself into Tarkov, propelling us both a dozen feet away. Before I was able to stand up again, he was on top of me. We struggled, and just as he got grip on the lever that was used to release my helmet, I struck his head with a sharp rock. His visor cracked, and while his air was slowly escaping his suit, I picked myself up and grabbed the rod. It was already stained with blood. He lunged at me, but I stabbed him in the chest. He then fell on top of me, and when our helmets touched, he spoke as the last of his air was pulled out from his lungs. "He is not your friend. Follow the voice." I picked myself up and walked over to Carver. I saw that his suit was punctured on the thigh and brownish red blood was being sucked out into the airless vacuum all around us. When I brought him inside the Charon, I realized that our first aid kit was gone. He was bleeding a lot and I managed to slow it down, but I had to treat him properly. I was afraid that if we took off, he would bleed out in zero gravity even faster. "There was a mech-it in the Russian thing, wasn't it?" he said. "Yeah," I replied. "Miller, you have to go and get it." "Fuck. It's not that far from here, is it?" said Carver. "No, it's not. Are you sure you can hold on until I get back?" I asked. "Yeah, just go." So I went. "Don't die on me, Carver. That's an order," I said before leaving. As I said, it didn't take long until I reached the Russian lander, but it felt like ages. Throughout the whole journey, I waited for something to jump out of the darkness around me. I wasn't surprised when I saw that the suit that was previously hung on the wall was now missing, but still, I felt a shiver run down my spine. I took their mech-it and headed back as soon as I could, but I couldn't stop thinking about Tarkov's last words. "He is not your friend. Follow the voice." I kept repeating inside my head. I then switched the channel on my radio to the one we heard the incomprehensible noise on. It was still on. I realized that it was stronger in one particular direction. "Follow the voice," I said to myself. Was this the voice Tarkov meant? Who is not my friend? Tarkov, Carver, the mission commander back at Earth. I had to find out. I drove off in the direction of the signal. After driving for at least 15 minutes, I reached a small crater about 30 feet in diameter. With my headlight on, I immediately saw that something was inside, but I couldn't recognize it yet. I stepped over the edge and walked into the crater and switched my light to full intensity. I stood there, paralyzed with raw terror for what felt like hours. There was a rectangular block of the same material as the pyramid in the center of the crater. A body was lying on top of it. Its limbs were contorted in the most twisted and gruesome way possible. His eyes were missing, and in their place were only 2 gaping holes. It was Carver. There was a small box stuffed inside his mouth. It was the black box from the satellite. I took the box and ran out of there as fast as I could. Carver was dead. If Carver was dead, who was the Carver I left in the Charon? "He is not your friend," was the only thing I had on my mind the rest of the way back. When I returned, Tarkov's body was gone, but Carver was still there, lying, bleeding. But it wasn't Carver. What was that thing? "Thank God you're back, Miller," said Carver. Not Carver. Carver was dead. Mutilated. Dead. "Miller, are you alright?" continued Not Carver. "Yeah, I've got the kid," I replied. He couldn't know that I know. It couldn't know. I treated his wound and the bleeding finally stopped. I strapped him in and then strapped myself in. I didn't tell him that I had found the black box. I didn't tell it that I found him. With the engine roaring below us, the Charon split in half and the crew compartment pushed us up into the void while the legs stayed planted on the lunar dust eternally. Now I already wrote on several occasions that I had felt minutes pass as if they were hours. The ascent and rendezvous took only a bit more than a dozen of minutes, but those minutes felt like decades. I wanted to scream so loud that my lungs would break and I wanted to vomit, but I couldn't because it would find out. I wanted to black out, but I couldn't. I had to save Ackerman. After several lifetimes, we finally docked with Ackerman and the Trinity. Throughout the whole ordeal, we kept him updated, but meeting him was different. He was scared, but I was scared even more. He didn't know that Carver was not Carver. I did know. I did unstrap first and pushed Ackerman out of the docking tunnel. I did kick Carver, not Carver, right in the face when he followed. I did close the docking tunnel behind me. "What the hell are you doing, Miller? What is wrong with you?" shouted Ackerman and slammed me to the wall of the command module. "Don't open it, Mike. It's not Carver. That thing in the LEM is not Carver, do you understand?" I shouted back in pain. Even though he was a battle-hardened soldier, Ackerman finally broke into tears. I floated past him over to the controls, and before I undocked the Charon, I glanced at the docking tunnel window one last time. There it was. A thing with Carver's face and body, but not Carver, staring at us, but his eyes were completely smooth and black as night itself. He opened his mouth in a way that was simply not possible for a human and let out a loud, disturbing screech that I wish I could forget so much. In a heartbeat, it turned to dead silence as the Charon detached from the CSM and drifted into the void. Me and Ackerman didn't say a single word throughout the 3-day journey back to Earth. We were placed in quarantine for months after we came back home. Nobody ever explained to us what happened on that mission. I never learned what was on the black box. Honestly, I didn't want to know after all I experienced. But whatever was there was apparently enough to cancel all other missions to the moon and beyond. They eventually released us and made it very clear that we're never supposed to talk about it. I never saw Ackerman from that day on. The only time I talked about him was when a pair of men in suits came to my home one day, a couple of years after the mission. "Captain Miller, have you been in touch with Lieutenant Ackerman lately?" One of them asked after we exchanged our greetings. "No, I never spoke or heard from him since the mission. Did something happen?" I replied. "I'm sorry to tell you, but Lieutenant Ackerman was found dead in a nearby forest yesterday." I had to sit down. I didn't know him that well, but we spent a considerable amount of time together in training, and we lived through hell itself together, so it was more than enough for me to consider him a friend. "Poor Mike. How did he die?" I asked. "We don't know yet, but he had multiple fractures on all of his limbs, and his eyes were gouged out." My search for the truth had finally yielded some success. Oh, where do I even start? I've mentioned that my grandfather knew some people here and there. He even introduced me to some of them, and I convinced myself to contact one such person who works at NASA. Unfortunately, he couldn't help me, but he gave me a contact for someone who possibly can. The other person didn't help me either, but they bounced me back and forth between about 10 other people, until I finally met this guy who actually knew what I was talking about. Well, I didn't meet him. I met him only online, but you get it. Obviously, I will not reveal his identity or any more information than what I'm going to write here. He wasn't very friendly when I first got in touch with him. When I asked him if he knew anything about Dawnbreaker, he almost hung up straight away. "Who told you about this? You are playing with things you don't understand, young man." "Jacob Miller was my grandfather," I explained. He went silent for a few seconds. "I see. I suppose we wouldn't be able to hide this forever. I can help you, not because you asked me, but because it's time. But I warned you, there are things you don't want to know." He mailed me a flash drive, and in a very complicated way explained to me what to do with it. The drive was actually just a dummy, and after I took it apart, it revealed a micro SD card. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing by posting it to the internet, because what you're about to read is going to give you many answers, but open even more questions. The SD card contained a transcript of what was probably an audio recording in Russian. Same as with my grandfather's message, I'll rewrite the contents below. Material number IEM 663. Source, record number EM13 at first dawn 1. Notes, transcript, translated from Russian. Damn piece of crap, is it working? Oh, thank God, it is. Apologize my rude introduction. My name is Leonid Ivanovich Tarkov. I was a cosmonaut on the Kamchatka station. Now let's cut the crap and get straight to the point. You know that we are here and you've been spying on us with your little Stapetnik for a while, and while I hate giving this to you, I hope you'll use this information well, because I have no other hope. In case you've really been living under a rock, I'll explain what's going on. We've been here for 2 months now. Me, Lenko, Novik and Commander Polyakov. God bless their souls. Our station is tiny but serves us well. It is a small dome with 4 rooms, a laboratory, a storage room, machine room, and a central living area. Our purpose was to research the moon and its structure. Long before you, Americans, found out, we already knew about the crater anomaly. On every other celestial body, the size and depth of a crater vary depending on the strength of the impact, but their shape should stay consistent. But on the moon, it is not like this. The craters here are too shallow. They never extend below a certain depth. We placed this station in one particularly large and deep crater with hopes to learn more about this curious phenomenon. All was going well until we started digging. It was the 64th day of the expedition. We all gathered there to watch the result of our hard work. The drill was a true engineering marvel designed specifically for this mission. The plan was to drill a hole as deep as we could. Ready to start rolling, comrades? Excitingly asked Lenko, our engineer. We all cheered, and after he hit the switch, the drill came to life. Silence transitioned to buzzing, buzzing transitioned to spinning, and spinning transitioned to drilling. I was very proud of being here, doing a service to the Union, but I looked forward to returning to Earth. This was the first step to our journey home. After we made sure that all was going well, we started packing and heading home. Naturally, Lenko was last, since he behaved like if the drill was his little child he must watch over. What do you guys think is down there? He asked as he rushed to catch up with us. Our equipment couldn't pick up anything below some 5 meters under the surface, so there must be a layer of some very dense mineral, or maybe some unknown element. Who knows? Elaborated Novik, our geologist. I think we're going to find cheese, I said, and we all laughed. Even Commander Polyakov chuckled. I was wrong. We all were so wrong. The drill jammed the next day. Lenko and Novik went there to elaborate, while I stayed at the base with the commander. He didn't talk much, and when he did, it was mostly to criticize someone. He was the kind of person who wasn't satisfied no matter what you did, but deep down, he cared for us and we respected him for that. Lenko and Novik later returned with a handful of sharp black rocks and rather surprising news. As we predicted, about 4 meters below surface, there's a layer of this immensely hard black material. It is so hard, in fact, that it broke the drill head, explained Novik. So, do you have any idea what it is? Asked Commander. Not yet. It might be some metastable crystalline mineral formed under high pressure, but we won't know what it is until I'll have a look at it. The next few days were very interesting. Me and Lenko spent almost all the time by replacing the drill heads. Novik was completely consumed by studying that strange material. The fact that he didn't make much progress only fueled his amazement. I was just doing some maintenance on the drill with Lenko when the drill suddenly plummeted down the hole, almost taking us with it. Did you see that? Asked Lenko with confusion. Of course I did, you idiot. It almost pulled me into that hole, in case you didn't notice, I responded. I then realized he probably didn't mean the drill, and I thought that he was going to say something, but he didn't. I looked into the hole. I pulled a glow stick out of the pocket of my suit, cracked it, and dropped it into the hole. It fell into some sort of a cavity. The rest of the team arrived shortly after, and the commander started cursing at the drill, then at us, and finally he congratulated us to making the first major discovery on this rock. I knew what was going to happen next. Prepare your gear and get some sleep. We're going down there tomorrow, said Polyakov. When we returned to Kamchatka, Lenko insisted that he needs to service the exterior equipment. I thought that it was a bit odd because he serviced the exterior 2 days prior, but our equipment breaks all the time, so I didn't consider it as a big deal. I wanted to stay with him so he wouldn't be left alone outside, but he refused with any possibility of convincing him, so I gave up on that. He returned inside 30 minutes after we did, anyway. However, a couple of minutes after he came back, we heard a bang from the airlock. Then another. We rushed there, and Novik took a look out of the window. He widened his eyes and scanned the outside with a blank expression on his face. What is it? I asked. I don't know, he replied. Lenko, do you know what's going on? You returned last, inquired Commander. No, I swear I have no idea what that was, he answered. Novik continued watching the outside for a few seconds and then went back to continue his work, so we did as well. The next day we descended down the hole. The commander went down first, and then I followed. I rappelled down 4 meters when I reached a layer of the black material. As if it wasn't hard enough already to fit through the narrow opening with the suit on, I had to be careful not to cut the suit on the sharp, jagged edges of the dark substance. I then got into a hollow section and descended further 10 meters down until I hit solid ground. It was pitch black, but with my headlight on, I saw that we were in a sort of cavern or dome. The walls were out of sight, but the floor was the same material like the ceiling. The drill was down there. It had collapsed down the hole when the ceiling gave way. We waited for the rest of the team and then headed into the darkness. After a few minutes, we sighted the wall. It was made out of the same material as I expected. "Do you have any idea what this is, Novik?" asked Commander. "I can't figure it out. It's like a really tight packed crystal, but I couldn't find out what it is made out of. It's completely inert, doesn't melt and doesn't conduct heat very well," he explained in return. We followed the wall and circled the whole cavity until we came back to where we started. The walls, the ceiling and the floor were just this completely smooth black material. We headed back to the opening. However, on our way back, we came across another opening in the ground. There was a ramp that went down like a spiral, and after hesitating for a while, we walked down. We descended into another smaller cavity where tunnels extended in 4 directions like crossroads. Nobody asked the obvious question. This wasn't a natural formation. There was 4 of us and 4 tunnels. One might think we would split up to cover more ground, but again, we were soldiers, not a bunch of stupid school kids, and so we stuck together. We walked for maybe 40 minutes. We passed several other intersections. The whole place seemed like a maze or a web of tunnels, and it would be really easy to get lost here, so each time we passed such intersection, we left a glow stick in the mouth of the tunnel we came from. The whole place was eerie, and the farther we went, the more uneasy I felt. Somewhere deep in my mind, I felt that we are not supposed to be here. We just came to maybe the 10th or 11th intersection. We continued straight, but after a couple of steps, I noticed that Lenko wasn't by my side anymore. I turned back to see him looking into one of the side tunnels at the intersection. "Guys, stop." I spoke to the radio. "Lenko, what is it?" He turned to face us and said, I don't know. Guys, I don't feel well. We need to go back. Something is not right down here." What followed happened so fast, but I felt like watching a slow motion video. At one moment, he stood there looking at us, but in the next moment, he was gone. Something pulled him into the tunnel. We ran back, and I wanted to follow, but Commander pulled me back. "What are you doing? We can't leave him behind," I shouted. "He's gone. We need to get out, otherwise we are all dead," he said. He was right. This wasn't our world. Whatever took Lenko was still down here with us. We needed to get out. We ran back from where we came from. Running in such low gravity was really awkward, but at least it was easier, so we didn't need to stop and catch our breath, even with our heavy suits on. However, when we reached the next intersection, we stopped nonetheless. The glowstick wasn't there. As we soon learned, all of them were gone. At first, we remembered the way, but at some point, we probably took the wrong route because we never reached the spiral ramp. We eventually reached something that seemed like a dead end. We wanted to head back when we all heard and felt a thumping in the distance. There was obviously no air, so the sound probably traveled through the ground. Thump, 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 thump. Novik was the first one who panicked. Thump, 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 thump. Fuck, 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 what now? What are we going to do, Commander? Please, we have to do something. I want to go home, he shouted across the radio. Thump, 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 thump. The pounding got louder and louder, or perhaps closer and closer. Thump, 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 thump. I was on the verge of panic as well when I noticed that the wall in front of us wasn't a single piece. There was a groove running from the top to the bottom at the center. "Help me with this," I said. Thump, 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 thump. With a combination of various tools, we managed to pry it open to reveal that the wall was in fact a door. The sound was now so close that I thought that if I looked back, I would have seen the source. But I didn't want to. We squeezed through the door and let it close behind us. Thump. Fuck, that was close. "Are you alright?" asked Commander. "How are we going to return back now?" asked Novik in response. "We'll find a way," said the Commander. "How? We have no idea where we are, and there's..." The Commander cut him off. "We'll find a way. We walked through another tunnel for some time until we reached a room. It was circular in shape, maybe 15 or 20 meters in diameter. It was filled with concentric rows of black boxes or tables perhaps. In the center, there was a black 3-sided pyramid. Again, 4 tunnels continued into the unknown, at each side, like at the intersections. What was that place? We decided not to waste time and went into one of the tunnels. We probably walked for hours, but our oxygen was almost gone, and not long after we left the circular room, I started to feel it. My mind became cloudy and my legs felt like jelly. I remember that we eventually reached a room. It was circular in shape, with concentric rows of black tables and a 3-sided pyramid in the center. I didn't have any energy left to realize that we returned somehow to the same room we came from. I collapsed to the ground, breathing heavily, struggling for any oxygen left in my air. In the final desperate measure, I detached my helmet. I took a deep breath and cold air filled my lungs before I collapsed. I saw something while I was unconscious. I can't remember it clearly, like when you wake up and you remember your dream, but you forget it in a couple of minutes. I remember that I saw some kind of being. I can't remember what it looked like, but I knew that it was sleeping. Then it woke up. Tarkov, a voice said at the edge of my consciousness. Wake up. I woke up to see Novik. Wake up, Tarkov. He repeated and shook me. I saw that he had also removed his helmet. Somehow, there was air and we could breathe it. But after all that's happened, it was one of the less surprising facts. What happened? I asked. Thank God you're alright. I don't know, but something is not right with Polyakov, he answered. I stood up and saw him standing in front of the pyramid. Commander Polyakov. He didn't respond. We started walking towards him with Novik. I passed out when we got back here. When I woke up, he was already standing there. He wouldn't respond and he didn't move an inch. Then I found you and woke you up, explained Novik. Polyakov moved his arm and touched the pyramid. I don't know why I didn't notice it before, but anyway, his helmet was still on. There's no way he had any oxygen left. Suddenly, the surface of the pyramid went black. I mean, it was black even before, but now it was so black that I couldn't even see the surface anymore, only the outline. It was like if somebody simply torn away a part of space itself. Some sort of black hand appeared in front of the pyramid. I can't comprehend where it came from, but it seemed to extend out from the pyramid itself. It grabbed Polyakov's arm, and in a blink of an eye, it pulled him into the darkness. We turned and ran into the tunnel to our right. A few dozens of meters into the tunnel, I stumbled and fell face down onto the ground, breaking my lamp in the process. The last light in the tunnel disappeared with Novik as he sprinted away, and then I was plunged into darkness. I then heard heavy footsteps behind me. I wanted to stand up and run, but I couldn't. I couldn't take it anymore. I just lay there and awaited my end as the footsteps got closer. Thump, 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 thump. The thing got right next to me and I felt a hand touch my leg. It touched my suit several other times and advanced towards my head. Then, to my horror, it touched my face. It was cold. I imagined the same hand that had just pulled Polyakov into the pyramid. I imagined it dragging me backwards and pulling me inside the pyramid to do terrible things to me. This was it. This was my end. But that didn't happen. Who is this? A shaky voice asked. I was startled and I didn't know what to do. It was Lenko's voice. It's Tarkov, I said after a while. Thank God I've found you. I thought I would die here alone, he said. I stood up and we walked through the tunnel together in pitch darkness. We roamed the tunnels for hours. Maybe days, weeks. At first it wasn't so bad because I wasn't alone. We filled the time by speaking about various things. We talked about our families, about our jobs, and about how we became astronauts. At one point, I asked him what happened after he was pulled away from us. He didn't answer and went silent ever since. It wasn't long until the silence forced me to start questioning each step I took. How did Lenko survive? What happened to Polyakov? But there was one thought that was much stronger than the others. Was it really Lenko next to me? Was it him or that monster with the black hand? I wouldn't know because I could not see. Why didn't he have a light? How did he find me? My gratefulness of not being alone shifted to terror. Each second, my desperation to see any light was stronger. I couldn't bear it anymore. I suddenly tripped and fell. Are you alright, Tarkov? Asked Lenko. I tripped on something, I explained. I turned and with my hands proceeded to feel the object that caused my fall. It was highly irregular but sometimes symmetric. At some places it was soft and flexible, while at others it was cold and smooth. I then realized what it was: a spacesuit. I eventually found the lamp and after some struggling, I detached it from the suit. At first, to my surprise, I was afraid to turn it on. I was afraid to see what was in the darkness all around us. I was afraid to see who was in the spacesuit, but I did it anyway. The brightness blinded my eyes, and after they adapted to the light, I saw Novik's face in the suit and Lenko standing over us. Our eyes met and for a brief moment, I felt that his eyes were somehow unnatural. Something wasn't right about them. I was just on the verge of realizing what it was when the body beside me twitched and took a long deep breath. "Novik, are you okay? How did you get here?" I asked. He was very disoriented. I don't remember. "Is that?" he said and looked at Lenko. He then looked at me and we both stood up. "I thought you guys were dead," he said. "So did we," I answered. I was delighted to finally see a human face. But it wasn't over. We still had to find a way out. I ran as far away as I could until I realized that you weren't following me. I wanted to head back for you, but I thought that you were gone as well. I can't remember what happened next. My head hurts just from trying to think about it, explained Novik. After managing to get a closer look at him, I realized that he was looking terrible, sick perhaps. His eyes were red and he was completely pale. Something was wrong with him as well. After a few hours, we decided to stop and take a break. I finally drifted into sleep. This time, I didn't have any dreams, just pitch darkness. It was more terrifying because it reminded me of the time I spent in the dark. I was woken up by something. It was Novik. He gestured to me to stay silent. I saw Lenko sleeping a few meters away. "Tarkov, listen," he whispered. "We need to go now. We need to get away from him." "What are you talking about? Are you crazy?" I whispered back. "Tarkov, do you remember the banging back at the station?" he asked. When I looked out of the window, I saw something, but at that point I thought that my mind was playing tricks on me, so I stayed silent, he explained. In the far distance, I saw a figure standing with its back turned to us. It was walking away, but it stopped when I focused my eyes on it. It turned and looked at me. It was him. It was Lenko, finished Novik his revelation. I took a minute to process all this. I then nodded and silently stood up. We proceeded to carefully walk away. Something was wrong with this place. Something I can't explain. People disappeared. People appeared. If what Novik was saying was true, was the person behind us Lenko? If not, what was it? Was Novik telling the truth? Was it really Novik or something else? I couldn't trust anyone. I didn't trust myself. It all felt so unreal, but so real at the same time. I had so many questions I didn't want answers to. I felt like I would break at this point. I felt as if the walls of the tunnel were collapsing on me, getting tighter and tighter each second. I wanted so desperately to get out. I wanted to go home, but I was so far away from home. Then I heard a voice behind me. "Are you my friend Tarkov?" asked Lenko. I turned to see him standing right behind Novik, who was just behind me. I didn't know what to do. Of course I'm your friend," I responded. "Good," he said. I looked in his eyes and realized what was wrong with them. They were pitch black. "What are you?" I shouted. "We are," everything he said in an unsettling, unnatural voice. He then opened his mouth in an impossible way and clamped around Novik's neck, engulfing his head in its throat. Novik screamed in agony, but his screams were muffled by the thing's flesh. I turned to run while I heard ear-piercing roars and screeches behind me. I was too afraid to look back, but I felt that it was getting closer. Thump, thump, thump. I ran through the tunnel for a while until I reached an intersection. In the center, there was a spiral ramp. My heart dropped. This could be where we came from. It had to be. Thump, 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 thump. I ascended the ramp, but the higher I got, the harder it was for me to breathe. I put my helmet back on and reached a big room. In the ceiling, there was a small ray of sunlight coming from a hole. Thump, thump, thump. I climbed out. I was finally out, but I didn't have time to celebrate. I was out of oxygen. What was left was only the air that became trapped in my suit as I reattached my helmet. My reserves were completely out. I went to walk to the base when I froze. I dropped to my knees. The base was gone, like if it was never there. Both of our landers were there, but the base itself was gone. I crawled into one of the landers. I almost suffocated on the way, but I made it. To whoever receives this, I'm presumably the last survivor of the Kamchatka expedition. I'm sending out this transmission in case I don't make it. I think that whatever is down there was asleep for a long time, but we woke it up. The engine is warming up now, but I'm afraid I'm out of time. I can see him outside. He's getting closer. God help me. End of record. To think about it, I can't sleep knowing that our own moon is something unnatural, something hiding so many terrifying truths. Whenever you take a look outside at the night sky, remember that sometimes the most mysterious and terrifying things are hidden in plain sight. "10 years ago, I pulled my wife's scorched, lifeless body out of a swimming pool. We had only been married for 3 days. You heard that right, 3 days. I wish the story didn't start there, but it does. Avery Jones was my soulmate. She was funny, spunky, and cute as hell. I was so deeply, ridiculously in love with her, and for good reason. She was way out of my league, but somehow she liked me enough to marry me. After 6 months of dating and another 6 months of engagement, we got married in a humble chapel in the Wasatch Mountains just outside of Salt Lake City. The next day, we flew out for a 10-day honeymoon at a beachfront resort in Fort Lauderdale, a wedding gift from my parents. On our second day there, while laying out on the beach, gnarly clouds blew in, accompanied by the heaviest rain I had ever seen. We laughed at our luck, packed up quickly, and ran with the rest of the beach and pool goers towards the hotel. Come this way, Avery said, pulling me down a narrow stone path through the landscape to a secluded cave installation under a bridge. Laughing hysterically with the help of our rain-diluted Mai Tais, we shed our dripping wet clothes and towels and sat down on the pool chairs in the cave. "You know we could swim right here," Avery said, pointing to the portion of the pool covered by the faux rock. I pretended to think it was a bad idea, then tackled her into the water. We splashed and wrestled around for a few minutes by ourselves, the heavy rain clapping outside the cave. After a few minutes, I hopped out and grabbed a couple dry towels from a nearby chair. I kicked my feet up and sat back, sipping my drink. Avery began an interpretive, synchronized swimming routine in her bright blue bikini. She whipped her auburn hair back and forth and swung her hands above her head with effortless grace. Even though she was joking, I was mesmerized. She was mine, I was hers. It was surreal. But then I got a feeling. A horrible feeling. One that said disaster was imminent. I didn't say anything to Avery though. Since I prided myself on being rigidly pragmatic, giving credence to feelings on only our 3rd day of marriage seemed like a bad idea. Whether it was a premonition or not, lightning struck the pool with a deafening crack. A deadly shockwave surged through the pool, killing Avery instantly and shooting me back against the rock wall. Once my hearing and sight returned, I saw Avery floating face down in the pool, 20 feet away from the cave. I yelled for help and jumped in. Hotel staff ran over and together we got her out of the pool. Medical staff arrived shortly thereafter and then an ambulance. She was pronounced dead on sight. The next day, we flew home, one of us seated in coach, the other in a body bag stashed below deck. I fell into a funk after the funeral and never recovered. I was convinced Avery was my soulmate, so when she died, the world fell out of working order. Nothing made sense anymore. I never dated again nor had any interest in women. Or people, for that matter. I took a job in Texas, bought a townhome, and quickly got into a routine. I talked to my parents occasionally but only returned home maybe 3 times over the last 10 years. Not a day goes by that I don't think about her. Hell, not even an hour. As our 10th anniversary approached, the data analytics firm I worked for was bought by another company, and I was let go. Though I was initially pissed, my tune shifted once the generous severance check came in the mail. The night the check came, I drank a lot and stumbled through Avery and my wedding album. Sometime around 1 in the morning, I made a decision. I decided that a decade of mourning was long enough. I decided that the next 10 years of my life weren't going to be steeped in self-pity. I would make something of myself. I'd read books again, I'd make videos again, I'd make friends, I'd pick up the guitar. The next night, with a drink in hand and money in the bank, I sat down at my desk and developed a plan with a vague goal of getting out of the country for a little bit. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, I fell into the rabbit hole called the Flat Earth Theory. I spent the next 3 hours reading and watching YouTube videos. For some reason, it all got funnier and funnier as the night went on. I didn't accomplish much that night, but by the next night, I had a solid plan. Over the next couple months, I sold my townhome, bought a camera, and booked an around-the-world trip in 5 flights. My objective was to document my travels and prove, once and for all, that the world was round. For the 3 weeks before my trip began, I moved back to Salt Lake City with my parents, who were surprisingly supportive of the endeavor. In my first video, I explained the rules. I would travel east until I made it back home. I would have a compass on me at all times. I would be awake and alert at all times of travel. Anyone who is staunch in their belief that the world is flat would likely think I'm faking the whole thing, but that wasn't really the point of the trip. I was trying to become a new man, remember. The day before I left, I was feeling nervous and oddly existential, more so than normal. This was big. Traveling around the world by myself. I never dreamed I could have done something like this, especially since Avery died. Part of me was proud of myself, the other part of me was questioning what the hell I was doing. Whatever it was, I decided to leave something behind to commemorate my existence. I stayed up late scrolling through thousands of pictures and ultimately choosing 4 for print. Avery and me on our wedding day, my cousin and me on skateboards, my parents and me last Christmas, and a horribly awkward picture of me standing by myself outside my Texas townhome. I rolled the pictures up tight, stuffed them in a dry Guinness bottle, then took the bottle and a shovel up the mountain behind my parents' house. About a 1/4 mile up the hill, I found a nice clearing amongst the scrub oak and dug a hole 2 feet deep. With my headlamp, I could see Avery's eyes peering at me through the thick brown bottle. I cried for a good 5 minutes, then tossed it into the hole. I covered it the best I could and returned home to get a couple hours of shut-eye before flying out. My dad drove me to the airport the next morning. I flew from Salt Lake to New York, New York to Amsterdam, Amsterdam to Shanghai, Shanghai to Los Angeles, then Los Angeles to Salt Lake. I am intentionally not getting into too much detail about the trip itself because that's not really the point of me writing this. Okay, I will indulge a little bit. How long did the trip take? A little over a month. I spent about a week in each place and 3 days in LA. Did I have fun? Hell yes, I had the time of my life. I realized that being away from the drudgery of my routine allowed some of my old self to reemerge, my pre-lightning strike days. I made friends, I was funny, I was charming. It was a little weird, honestly. Was it good for me? Other than what I'm about to tell you, yes, it was fantastic. I truly feel like a changed man. Did I gain a following? I actually did. I mean, I didn't go viral or anything, but as of this writing, I have about 50,000 subscribers. Most think the flat earth theory is BS, but some are believers. I don't know if any of them will ever listen to this. How do you feel about that lame time capsule now? I know you probably didn't have this question specifically, but this is important to me. The longer the trip went on, the more embarrassed I felt about the time capsule I left in the ground behind my parents' house. The life I conveyed in that bottle was tinged with regret, loss, sorrow. Particularly my apathetic face standing in front of my stupid townhome, or with my parents on Christmas. I decided on my trip that I wouldn't replace any of the pictures in the time capsule, but I would add some, change the ending of my story, if you will. Okay, enough of that. So, is the world round? That's where things get complicated. I successfully stayed awake during all hours of travel, which was very difficult, especially that Amsterdam to Shanghai leg, good God. But I can confidently say that I traveled east the whole time and successfully made it back to Salt Lake, which would rule out the whole flat earth thing, but I can't confidently say the earth is round either. Here's what happened. When I got home, both the front, back, and side doors were locked. I tried the garage keypad, but it didn't work. When I texted my mom, it failed to go through. Then I tried my dad, same thing. I brushed it off, telling myself that a month is a long time. My parents could have switched cell carriers and could have changed the garage code. With no way into the house and nothing to do, I decided to make the planned modifications to my time capsule right then, even though it was dark out. I trekked up the mountain with a shovel from the back porch and found the spot 20 minutes later. I dug cautiously and successfully extracted the bottle. I saw Avery's eyes again peering at me through the brown bottle, this time a little foggy from sitting underground for a month. As I pulled the rolled up pictures out, I decided that merely adding new pictures wasn't going to solve my problems. I needed a ritual, a way to symbolize my rebirth. I thought about ripping up the old pictures or burning them. I thought about collecting everything I still owned of Avery's and throwing it into a bonfire. Perhaps I wouldn't be able to move on until I could erase Avery, the personification of my old, deceased self, from my life. Like I said before, I was a new man. Then I saw something at my feet. With the flashlight on my phone, I saw that I had dropped one of the old photos. It was the picture of me and my parents at dinner last Christmas at the Grand America Hotel. Only in this picture, there was a fourth person. A beautiful woman about my age, with fair skin and long auburn hair. It was Avery. I was confused at first. Perhaps I had put a different picture in the bottle than I had thought. God knows Avery and I had gone to plenty of dinners with my parents when she was alive. But I wouldn't have done that. I already had a picture of Avery and me on our wedding day. That was enough. I remember distinctly thinking one picture of Avery was enough. Then I looked closer at myself in that picture. It was definitely from last Christmas. It was 33-year-old me, not 23-year-old me. I had a beard last Christmas, a feat I could not have managed when I was 23. Since I printed the pictures only a month before, I pulled up the original on my phone with numb, shaky fingers and held them side by side. It was the same picture. I had before me two distinct realities, one in which Avery was alive and one in which Avery was dead. Everything else was the same. How the hell is this possible, I thought. The picture of our wedding day was the same. So was the picture of my cousin and me skateboarding. The picture of me standing in front of my Texas townhome was different though. Instead of a townhome, it was a small red house, apparently still in Texas. And, of course, Avery was standing next to me wearing a green plaid button-up shirt. She would have pursued her degree in nursing had she lived, I'm sure. The dual income would have allowed us to buy a house instead of a townhome, I figured. But still, what the fuck is happening? My knees grew weak and I sat down, looking back and forth between the two pictures with Avery now in them. She truly was stunning, more beautiful than I remembered. I stumbled into a new reality. I don't know how or when, but here I am, in a world where Avery lives. I'm sure that isn't the only difference, but it's the only one I'm aware of as of this writing. If I truly am in a new reality, what happened to the old one? Am I missing? Did I get duplicated? Did that old reality disappear? I laid on my back in the crunchy snow and closed my eyes. Where do I go from here? A pair of headlights flashed through the aspen trees and I sat up abruptly. A car was pulling up the driveway. I shuffled my way down the snowy banks close to the house. I remained perched there for about 5 minutes before the kitchen lights clicked on and I saw 4 people emerge. 2 of them were my parents, looking the exact same as they did in the other reality. Then in walked Avery. Then, in a moment even more unsettling than seeing Avery alive, I saw myself enter the room. My heart was pounding. Other me was wearing the same outfit I'm wearing today, even sporting the same scruff. The only difference was the little bit of gray hair above his ears. I slid further down the hill to get a closer look. For a moment, a long moment, I forgot about my replica and watched Avery. She was gorgeous in person, more gorgeous than in pictures. She had always been that way. This is what my life would look like if I hadn't been such a coward, I thought, feeling a tear trickle down my cheek. The 4 of them talked and laughed excitedly, eventually shedding their coats and moving to the front living room. I climbed down the rock wall and ran around to the front of the house, hiding behind a group of pine trees near the front stairs. My dad left for a couple minutes and returned with a bottle of wine and 4 glasses. I fell deeper into a daze watching them, mostly Avery. They had a great time chatting for at least a couple hours while I sat like a fool between the pines, my toes and hands freezing. She was so effortlessly charismatic, so charming. The way she talked with her eyes, the way her teeth flashed when she smiled, the way she leaned in when she was engaged. Everything about her was perfect. What I wouldn't do to steal this man's reality. I watched other me and Avery say their goodbyes and exit through the kitchen. Their car doors slammed shut and I realized that I was going to lose them. In my reality, I was living at home while I did my around the world trip. Where would I have lived if I was still married to Avery? We had always talked about returning to the Salt Lake area eventually. Maybe they did it. As they rolled down the driveway in their 2019 Honda Accord, I ran to the side of the house and found an old bike from my childhood rusted against the wall. Both tires were flat and the front brakes didn't work, but since my parents lived way up in the mountains, wherever other me and Avery were going was downhill. Even though I went as fast as I could, they were long gone. Obviously, my 25-year-old junkyard bike didn't stand a chance, but I kept going, rolling past the church, the junior high, then through the Oak Hills neighborhood, all the while racking my brain. If Avery and I were still married, where would we have lived? It wasn't a fair question to ask myself. After all, we had known each other for a little over a year and had only been married 3 days when she died. In this other reality, other me and Avery had been married 10 years. That's a lot of time to know someone. People change, opinions change, circumstances change. I can't read other me's mind, so all I could do was hope for a miracle. As I was about to turn the corner onto Orchard Drive, I saw a pair of taillights in a driveway off a side street, Fair Oaks Drive. Of course, I thought. Avery and I talked about renovating an old home on Fair Oaks one day, but man, that was one conversation when we were engaged. Impressive that they pulled it off. My vision was blurry from biking almost a mile downhill in freezing temperature, but as I got closer to the house, I recognized the car to be theirs. I snuck around the back of the house where I had a view of the living room and kitchen. I smiled looking at the renovated, well, mostly renovated, home. Pictures of Avery and other me lined the walls. There was even an old stand-up piano in the corner, just like the one Avery had always talked about. I found a little slice of heaven. This is everything my life would have been had I acted on that inner voice to pull Avery out of the water 10 years ago. Instead, I'm a depressed bum living with my parents. They made their way into the kitchen and took off their coats. Other me started on the dishes and Avery sat on the couch, eyes glued to her phone. I figured they were exhausted. It was midnight after all. After a minute, Avery stood up and walked down the hall. I ran to the other side of the house to try and get a view of her, but as I turned the corner, an outdoor security light came on and I ducked down in some bushes. Other me put the dishes down and walked to the back window to inspect. Then I heard a crash from inside, where Avery was. Other me jerked around then stopped in his tracks. Go help her, I thought. You cowardly bastard. I returned to my original post in time to see Avery stomping down the hallway and into the kitchen. She was red-hot furious. She walked right up to other me with a piece of paper in her hand. I couldn't hear exactly what she said, but she screamed something and threw the paper at his face. Other me put his hands up as a weak defense. What did you do to Avery this time? As other me tried to explain away whatever was on that paper, Avery grew more furious. She paced to the kitchen and barked something else, then picked up a glass other me had been in the middle of washing and threw it across the room, shattering on impact. Who the hell is this woman? Other me continued to speak calmly in defense, but there was no slowing Avery down. She grabbed a picture off the wall and threw it hard on the ground, the wooden frame crunching. Other me backed away slowly, moving to the other side of the kitchen island. Then Avery pounced. She ran at him with unrestrained vengeance and shoved him hard against the kitchen cabinets. He held his hands out again, pleading for her to calm down. She grabbed a plate from the sink and swung it at him, but he moved out of the way and it shattered violently against the cabinets behind him. This only made her madder. She shoved him again, then clawed at his face. Other me got tangled in his feet and stumbled against the fridge. She slapped him hard against the side of the head and he yelped in disbelief. Again, he begged for her to stop, but she didn't. She hit him 3 more times in the face while he slumped to the ground. After the third hit, one of his eyes was already swollen shut and blood was streaming down his face. Avery walked to the other side of the kitchen island, and I breathed an audible sigh of relief. Avery, the girl of my dreams. The girl that made all my friends jealous. The girl I had on a pedestal for the last decade. A monster. I know that we tend to forget people's negative attributes after they've passed, but there was not a violent bone in Avery's body when I knew her. Not even an aggressive one. She was sweet, kind, loving. Not like this, not at all. What happened to her? As I watched the other bruised and bloodied version of myself weep on the kitchen floor, my world crumbled. All this time I had hated myself for not listening to that voice, for not pulling her out of the pool and saving her life. If only I had done that, we could have gone on to create a beautiful life together. Finish school, build careers, buy a house, get a dog. We'd do it laughing and playing the whole time, like 2 kids in love. I'd be complete forever. But with that one lapse in judgment, Avery died along with the entire vision for my perfect future. But no, that's not how life would have been. This is how life would have been, with me crying on the kitchen floor with blood running down my face and shattered dishes all around me. Is it possible that my reality, the one I came from, was the better life? There was another crash and a scream from the bedroom. Avery round 2. She stomped back into the kitchen and other me stumbled to his feet. Again, he tried to calmly plead, but again, she wasn't having it. She yelled at him for another minute, then threw a coffee mug at him, shattering against his shoulder. He backed away from her, moving to the back door close to where I was hiding. I ducked down further. The door burst open and other me went sprawling past me, tripping and falling into the snow. Avery stopped in the doorway and scoffed. "You think you're better off without me, don't you? That's what all this is about," she said. "Avery, please, think about what you're doing. Look what you've done to me just now. We cannot keep living like this. I cannot keep living like this. I've put up with it for far too long," other me said and stood up. Avery began sobbing quietly, her arms folded tight. Other me took a step toward her. "Don't get any closer to that thing," I thought. "You're right. You're so right," Avery said, tears running down her cheeks. "God, I'm so horrible to you. You don't deserve this. You deserve someone better. Far better. Someone who will love you no matter what. No matter." Other me stayed composed while she cried. "Will you ever forgive me?" she said. There was a minute of silence. I tried to steady my breathing despite feeling like I was going to explode. Other me swallowed hard and widened his stance. "No, Avery, this is it. I'm doing this. It doesn't mean we're over, it just means I need some time away." He turned his back to her and walked to the front of the house where the car was parked. Avery huffed and slammed the back door, returning to the kitchen. I peered my head up and saw her going to the knives next to the stove. I thought about intervening but didn't know how. She carried a knife to the front door. I ran around the side of the house, past the security light to the front. Other me had just turned on the car and was starting to back out of the driveway when Avery appeared with the knife. "Stop," she screamed at him, trying to block his path. Other me continued backing out, his eyes growing wide when he saw the massive knife in her hand. "Stop this fucking car right now," she screamed and tried stabbing one of his tires, but its rotation kicked the knife of her hand. She quickly picked it up off the driveway. He pulled into the street and sped away, leaving Avery standing in the driveway in her pajama shorts with a giant knife dangling by her side. When the headlights were gone, she dropped the knife and began crying again. My first instinct was to comfort her, an instinct that I quickly overruled. I only watched her in pure bewilderment. Never should have left fucking Texas. After a few minutes, she returned inside and I could hear her cleaning up the mess. That's when something dawned on me. I made a time capsule because I was about to do something big, something life-changing. For me, I was about to embark on an around-the-world trip, but why would other me make a time capsule? Was he also planning something big? Before I could follow that train any further, I realized that the paper that set Avery off a few minutes before was now sitting in the middle of the driveway. I stood up carefully, making sure I was out of sight, and grabbed it. With my phone as a flashlight, I read the paper. Salt Lake City to New York, December 28th. New York to Amsterdam, January 4th. Amsterdam to Shanghai, January 12th. Shanghai to Los Angeles, January 19th. Los Angeles to Salt Lake City, January 23rd. I let the crumpled paper fall to the ground. He was planning the same trip I just came from, which meant he was going to experience what I just experienced. Probably. If he makes it around the world and returns to Salt Lake, he would be stepping into a new reality. If anyone deserves a new reality, it's that guy, so I didn't try to stop him. Lightning struck a tree nearby, knocking me to the ground and killing the power to the rest of Fair Oaks. It began to rain. I walked to Orchard Drive and followed it to Dee's, the only 24-hour diner on this side of town. I'm recording this on a borrowed laptop in a booth at Avery, and I had occupied many times when we were younger. I don't know what happened to the reality I came from, if I'm now missing or dead or what. I don't know what will happen to other me if and when he makes his trip around the world. I don't know if there are other me's planning around the world trips too, thereby disrupting who knows how many more realities. How many other realities are there? Infinite. Frankly, I don't even know what will happen to this recording once I publish it. I assume it will be trapped in this reality forever, but who knows how this works. Just a few hours earlier, I smugly thought I had figured out the answer to the embarrassingly juvenile question, is the world round? My cab just got here, so this is the end of the line for me. There are plenty of unanswered questions here, questions I hope I'll eventually find answers to. All I know now is that I don't like the reality I came from and I don't like the reality I'm in now, so there's only one way to go. See you in New York, other me. I was a Navy SEAL, BUD S-Class 237, and assigned to SEAL Team 10. I enlisted in the Navy after dropping out of college. I realized it just wasn't for me, going to college, getting my degree, and working some 9-to-5 job for the rest of my life. I felt like I was meant for something more. My parents were not happy when I told them I had quit college and planned on becoming a Navy SEAL. Looking back on it, I probably should have pushed through my last 2 years of college so I could have at least had a degree to fall back on in case things didn't work out. I made it through training, and let me tell you that was one of the hardest things I have ever had to do, and eventually earned my SEAL Trident. I remember the day like it was yesterday. "Seaman Dakota Waters, please step forward," said my SQT instructor. He smiled, pinned on my trident, and we saluted each other. And that was that. I was officially a Navy SEAL. Everyone clapped, including my parents who were there and had grown to accept my decision. The moment was surreal, so much hard work, finally paying off. Within a month, I was shipped out to Afghanistan for my first tour. After my first tour, I found a girlfriend, Mary, who I eventually married. During my second tour, I was notified we had a little girl on the way. After 3 tours to all around the Middle East, I had eventually worked my way up to Chief Petty Officer. The guys on my squad, they were my brothers. I had spent more time with them than I did my own family, and we had been through hell together. One day about 4 months after coming home from Iraq after our 3rd tour, me and some buddies from the team were kicking back by a bonfire at a ranch one of my buddies owned. We were having a good time, drinking beers, telling stories, laughing, and reminiscing. It was at that moment when I received a phone call. It was our commanding officer. I thought this was odd because our commanding officer, Lieutenant Shipley, never calls us unless it's extremely urgent. I told everyone to quiet down and I put it on speaker. "Chief Petty Officer Waters, are you alone?" said Shipley on the other end of the line. No, I'm with the squad." "Why?" I replied. "Good, they need to hear this too," he replied. "In 1 week, you and your squad will be shipping out to Panama to conduct reconnaissance on illegal trade routes leading up through Central America and into the US. We all looked at each other, somewhat in shock. We had all just gotten back from deployment not 4 months ago, and now they are shipping us off to Panama. One of my teammates, Daniel, spoke up and said that can't be right. There are no known drug trafficking routes in southern Central America. Maybe they've found new ones, and they want us to gather more information on them," my buddy Ricky said, sounding incredulous. "Regardless of what exactly they want us to be looking at, it's complete bullshit. We are already getting deployed again," I complained. We all thought the whole situation was very weird, but eventually we just accepted it. Just as stated, exactly a week from that day, we were on a plane being shipped out to Panama. Panama is a trashy place, no offense to anyone from there, but after what happened to me there, I do not regret talking bad about the place. It's awful. The second we landed at the headquarters in the middle of the fucking jungle, where we would be living for the next 2 months, I knew I was gonna hate it. Humid, sticky, warm, bugs constantly buzzing around your ear, it's enough to make a bunch of hardened warriors go mad. We got to our bunks, unpacked our stuff, and relaxed. We knew it was going to be a long 2 months, so we needed all of the sleep we can get. "Wonder what exactly they're gonna have us spying on tomorrow?" asked Johnson, our team's medic. "No idea," Ricky replied. That's the last thing I remember before drifting off into sleep. I was awoken the next morning to Lieutenant Shipley banging on the side of my bunk. "Everyone up. Time to go. Everyone up. Come on." I checked the clock on the wall above my bed. 3:42 in the morning. I rubbed my eyes, shook my head, and sat up. "This damn early, Lieutenant," I said irritatingly. "I don't make the rules, I just enforce them," he replied. "Everybody up, let's go." Once everyone was up, we grabbed a quick snack to give us some energy and then headed to the briefing room to figure out what we were going to be doing. The briefing room was small, you could fit maybe 10 people at most in there. We were greeted by some army general, whose name I didn't know. He shook our hands and sat all 4 of us, myself, Ricky, Daniel, and Johnson down. "Alright boys, your mission is to gather as much information as you can on this tunnel we discovered about 80 clicks southeast from this point. We suspect it to be used by drug traffickers to smuggle contraband such as heroin and cocaine across the border into Mexico so the cartels can ship it to America. There is a clearing with a perfect view of the entrance to the tunnel about 600 yards where you all can remain hidden. Overall, the objective is fairly simple. Watch the entrance of the tunnel, photograph what you see, make reports, and report back of anyone entering or exiting the tunnel. Got it?" We all replied with yes sir. Exfil will be 20 clicks over this mountain at approximately 9 p.m., so don't miss it, Shipley added. It was at that moment I realized that Shipley was in full combat gear. I don't know how I hadn't noticed it before. "Are you going on this operation with us, Shipley?" I asked. "Oh no, I got my own operation with another squad," he said. I thought that was a little weird. I thought this entire situation was weird. Ever since we had arrived, things hadn't seemed right. I asked my squad if they felt the same way, and they said they did. Johnson said he had been getting weird looks from all of the higher-ranking personnel since he had gotten here. He told me he even saw 2 Air Force women pointing at him and whispering something in each other's ears. I didn't know what to make of the situation, but what could I do? My job was to execute what the higher-ups told me to do. We were to load up on the helicopter in 5 minutes. "Alright boys," I said, "let's load out." We collected our gear, weapons, and everything else we would have needed for this operation. The helicopter ride there was rather uneventful. 20 minutes of flying over a thick jungle until eventually we saw it. You could barely see it due to it being the early morning and still being dark, but it was there. It was bigger than any tunnel I had ever seen. The opening of it stood at least 90 feet tall and looked like it had been there for centuries. The helicopter flew us right past it, about half a mile away from it, until it dropped us off. The reason we get dropped off so far away from the objective is in case anyone of interest is at the location at that current moment, they will not see us. Once we were dropped off, it was a good walk to get where we were going to settle up in. Once we got there, we unpacked everything we had. Johnson had his pair of binoculars, Ricky had a zoomed-in scope he attached to his long-range rifle, Daniel had a camera and notepad, and I was on communications duty, or comms as we like to call it. The first 5 hours were uneventful. Sitting there with our perfect view of the entrance to the tunnel, nothing happened, no one entered, no one left it. It was around 10:30 at this point, and the sun was up now. It was around this time when I told Ricky, Daniel, and Johnson that we should take sleeping schedules. 2 of us keep watch while the other 2 sleep, and we would switch every 3 hours. We were to wake the 2 sleepers up if anything eventful happened. Daniel and Johnson offered to take first watch while Ricky and I slept. I was fine with that idea. The Lord knew I needed some shut-eye. I rolled out my backpack for a pillow and slowly drifted off to sleep. Dakota, wake up. I was awoken to Johnson shaking me and yelling in my face. "What's going on?" I asked. I then looked around and noticed Daniel was missing. Where the hell did Daniel go? The tunnel. He walked into the tunnel. "What do you mean he walked into the tunnel?" asked Ricky, who was awake at this point. It was about an hour after you 2 had gone to sleep. He had been completely normal, but then he just got up and started walking towards the entrance. I tried to stop him, but he just kept walking. It was almost as if he was in some kind of trance. Johnson replied. "We gotta go after him," I said. "We were given strict orders not to enter the tunnel." Johnson replied hesitantly. "That's our damn brother in there, let's go," Ricky said, grabbing his rifle and running towards the tunnel. Me and Johnson both grabbed our rifles and followed Ricky. As we got closer and closer to the tunnel, I began to make out more distinct features of it. It had stalagmites and stalactites, and it didn't go straight through the mountain, it went down into it. This wasn't a tunnel, this was a cave. "Wait," I said. "Look at this. I don't know any drug traffickers that would use this to smuggle cocaine. Ricky and Johnson both looked as baffled as I was. "What do we do?" asked Ricky. "We can't leave Daniel down there," I said. "Hope you guys like spelunking." We turned on the flashlights to our rifles and began our descent into the cave. The first few hundred feet had nothing in them, just dark tunnels. But about 500 feet in, we began noticing drawings on the walls. At first they were just normal caveman drawings, pictures of tigers and leopards from thousands of years ago. But as the drawings went on, they got more confusing. The leopards and tigers were soon replaced by violent scribbles, as if someone had gotten a piece of chalk and scrubbed the walls with it as hard and spastically as they could. We kept following the scribbles along the wall until they eventually stopped. What was drawn after the scribbles I still have not forgotten to this day. A picture of a person, but it wasn't a person. It had long, disgusting tentacles and dragon-like wings. It had horns on its head with a long lizard-like tail. But it wasn't so much the drawing of the creature that scared me, it was the drawings of the hundreds of people around it bowing to it, worshipping it. The pictures then went on to show people giving human sacrifices to this creature. There were drawings of babies being burned alive and the burnt corpse being fed to it. It was disgusting. "What the fuck," said Ricky. "Maybe it's a drawing of a deity thought to have been real by an ancient civilization," Johnson replied. It was at that moment we heard Daniel scream from deep within the cave. "That's Daniel," I screamed. We all rushed towards where we heard the scream, tripping and tumbling over rocks the entire way. We kept screaming things out like, "We're coming, Daniel," or "Don't worry, buddy." But something in my mind kept telling me it was too late for Daniel, and if we went down there we would meet his same fate. But I couldn't leave Daniel down there, even if he was dead. He has been with me since the first day of SEAL training. He was my brother. We raced down the cave, sprinting as fast as we could, until eventually we turned a corner and... "Oh my God," Ricky whispered. We all stood there in horror. At first I didn't exactly know what I was looking at, but then it dawned on me. It was Daniel's body. It was torn to shreds. It was almost unrecognizable, and if it weren't for his dog tag, I might not have been able to figure out it was him. We all stood there over what was left of his corpse, petrified with fear. I was about to say something until we heard a loud crash coming from across the what I now realized was a massive dome-like room within the cave. We all turned to look to where we had heard the crash, and what we saw makes me regret ever joining the military in the first place. That thing that was drawn on the walls of the cave. There it was, looking at us. It looked even more hideous in person. It was about 40 feet tall, jet black save for dark blood-colored eyes. It had jagged teeth with 10 long squid-like tentacles protruding from its back. It had those black dragon-like wings and a lizard-like tail just like on the drawings. Its face, my God, its face. The red eyes and jagged teeth, the rotted skin, and the long black hair. I wanted to say it looked human, but this thing was far from human. It let out one raspy growl, and the walls of the cave began to shake. Then it got even worse. People, thousands of people, wearing clothing made out of bones and cloth with face and body paint all over them began closing in on us. I don't know where they came from, but there were at least 2,000 of them. "We gotta get the hell out of here," I yelled. Ricky and Johnson were still petrified with fear. "Let's go," I yelled at both of them. All of a sudden the creature shrieked a disgusting shriek, and one of its tentacles extended a tremendously long length and wrapped around Ricky. With one swift pull, Ricky went flying in the air and into the creature's mouth. I wanted to do something, but there was no time. I yelled at Johnson to follow me, and we both began to run. I fired off a few rounds at the people chasing after us, and they fell to the ground, creating a small gap for me and Johnson to run through. I sprinted through that gap, nearly getting caught by one of the people. Once I was out of the gap, I checked to see if Johnson was behind me, and he was. We both raced up the cave, trying to remember where we had come from. The last thing either of us wanted was to get lost in this hellhole with that thing. We kept sprinting, desperately making our way through the cave until we saw the light from the entrance. I quickly glanced behind me and noticed that some of the people were still chasing after us. I grabbed a frag I had on me and tossed it at them, sending them all flying. The relief only lasted for a second though, when I heard a demonic screech come from within the cave. At that moment, me and Johnson sprinted out of the cave and kept running. When we were about 300 yards away from the cave, I turned around to see if we were being followed. There it was, not following us, but standing at the entrance of the cave looking right at us. We both stared at it for about 30 seconds. It let out one last deafening screech and then went back into the cave. Neither me or Johnson knew if it was going to come back out, but we weren't staying to find out. We resumed running, not stopping until we knew we were far away from that cave. When we finally stopped, we both found a place to rest, and we just sat there, not saying a word. About an hour passed before Johnson finally asked, "What time is it?" I checked my mobile clock, 8:30 p.m. Exfil was in 30 minutes. "Do you remember where Exfil was?" I asked Johnson. "Yeah, when we were running I somehow managed to keep track of where we were. Luckily for us the helicopter is supposed to arrive 5 miles west of here," he replied. I sighed with relief and we began heading that way. When we got there, the helicopter was waiting for us. "What took you all so long? We were just about to head off and leave you." "And where are the other two?" the pilot asked. I just looked at him with a blank expression on my face. He just nodded and began to take off. When we arrived back at HQ, me and Johnson were pulled into a room and sat down. 4 men in suits and the general that had briefed us walked in. They had looks of pity on their faces, and one of the suited men leaned in. He sighed. "Here is $100,000 each for both of you. Never speak of this again," he said. He slid the wads of cash to both of us from across the table, and they all filled out except for the general. The general looked at us with a sad look on his face for a minute, and then informed us that our flights home would be tomorrow, and the option for an early retirement would be presented to us. I am now a 46-year-old man, still happily married to my loving wife Mary, and the proud father of a beautiful 17-year-old daughter named Jessica. I still keep in touch with Johnson, and sometimes we get together at a bar or around a bonfire and just cry together. Cry about what we had witnessed and for the loss of our 2 brothers. I will forever hold hatred towards the United States military and the government for willingly putting us in the situation they did. Lying to us so we wouldn't back out of the operation and getting my 2 closest friends killed. When my wife asked what happened to Ricky and Daniel, I lie and say they were shot while in Afghanistan. When I wake up screaming at night from the nightmares, I tell her it was just nightmares from what happened in the Middle East. I could never tell her what actually happened or why I was actually diagnosed with severe PTSD. I even lied to the doctors at the VA. Partially because I was informed by the government to never speak of what happened, but also because I would be deemed crazy if I ever told anyone. I couldn't keep it to myself any longer though. I had to get it off my chest. So for all of you out there, never become a Navy SEAL, never enlist in the military, and never, and I mean never, journey to the Darian Gap in Panama. Thank you to my superfans, Sweet Black Swan, Tacey, and Brooklyn. I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and I look forward to making more content for everyone.